Chapter 66. That day, the Imperial army won a victory, and at night, the Imperial soldiers drank and celebrated, but who knew that the barracks would be attacked by the enemy that night? That night, the flames were blazing, and there was fighting everywhere. Gravel saw the opportunity and escaped with a few slaves. They ran for their lives and finally ran into a forest. Gravel instinctively looked behind him and saw a group of pursuers rushing over. Gravel told the others to find a place to hide first, while he lay alone on the forest path. There were about a dozen pursuers, and the leader was riding a horse. The man on the horse saw Gravel lying on the ground and ran over first. He dismounted to see if Gravel was still alive. Unexpectedly, Gravel nimbly grabbed him and stabbed the dagger hidden behind his back into his heart. Then Gravel rode the man's horse. The pursuers behind rushed over at this time and wanted to surround Gravel. Gravel's legs squeezed the horse's belly, and the horse immediately rushed forward, knocking a pursuer to the ground. The pursuers didn't have bows and arrows, so they could only chase Gravel from behind. As for Gravel, he rode in circles with the pursuers to exhaust their stamina. Later, the pursuers were tired, and they lined up in a line, waiting for Gravel to rush over. Gravel desperately turned the horse's head and wanted to go around the pursuers. With a charge, the pursuers couldn't dodge and were killed by Gravel with a knife. The rest of the pursuers slashed at Gravel with knives, but fortunately, Gravel's riding skills were superb and he dodged. The pursuers sullenly picked up stones and threw them at Gravel, and the two sides were in a stalemate. The hidden slaves found some wooden sticks from somewhere and suddenly jumped out to fight the pursuers. Gravel saw the opportunity to kill a few pursuers. In this way, the pursuers fled when they saw the situation was not right, and Gravel also lost several slaves. That night, Gravel and a few others camped by a stream. They ate roasted chicken they had just caught and talked and laughed. But Gravel had something on his mind. It was Darlena, who had done everything for him. At dawn, Gravel and the others set off. Their goal was Higher Castle. After a few days of travel, Gravel and the others returned to Higher Castle. Gravel had Hardedef disguise himself and sneak into the city to gather information. Hardedef found a place to sit down in a tavern. He heard that a nun was going to become a sacrifice to the gods and that she would be burned alive in the monastery near Higher Castle in 2 days. Hardedef also heard that the nun was Count Sedak's woman. Hardedef told Gravel the nun, and Gravel sent another person to find out if the nun's name was Darlena. In the end, Gravel confirmed that the nun was indeed Darlena. That night, when the sky darkened, Gravel sneaked into the monastery with a few rescued slaves. There were no soldiers in the monastery, only some monks. After avoiding the monks, Gravel finally found Darlena in a locked room. He saw that Darlena's hands and feet were tied with ropes. Gravel cut the ropes. When Darlena saw Gravel, her face was full of surprise and tears flowed out. Gravel also understood that Darlena had suffered too much in the past few months. He quickly untied Darlena and prepared to take her away. Suddenly, many flames appeared in the darkness. It turned out that the monks had already discovered Gravel and the others. The monks had told the guards of Higher Castle. Fortunately, there weren't many guards in this group. There were only a dozen or so of them, but they were all well equipped. Gravel told Hardedef and the others to take Darlena and escape along the planned route, while he stayed behind to deal with the guards. Gravel attracted the guards to his side, so that the others could quickly evacuate. Gravel cleverly used the darkness of the night to disguise himself, and finally escaped from under the eyes of the guards. Unfortunately, an ignorant monk accidentally discovered him, so Gravel had to knock him out. Gravel quickly ran to the place where he had agreed to meet with Hardedef and the others. When Gravel saw Darlena, although the two of them had a lot to say, a simple hug replaced all the words. At this time, the two of them had tears in their eyes. "We will never be separated again." Yes. Darlena had never felt as happy as she did at this moment, as if the previous nightmare was finally over. After Gravel's ruckus, the news spread throughout Higher Castle. At the same time, the monastery sent more troops to investigate the matter, and Baron Sedak was the person in charge. When he heard Gravel's name again, Sedak was so angry that his beard stood on end. He ordered for the matter to be investigated thoroughly. Gravel, on the other hand, quietly returned to the resistance camp with a few men. He couldn't help but feel emotional when he revisited the place. After all, Gravel was a little disappointed in Merlin after being captured. The resistance guard at the gate danced with joy when he saw Gravel. The guard used to follow Gravel and admired Gravel from the bottom of his heart. News of Gravel's return spread throughout Wilson's camp, and people came out to welcome Gravel. Most of them were Gravel's trusted subordinates, such as Tony, Anna, Haybull, and Bethman. Even Merlin came out to welcome Gravel personally. However, Gravel caught a hint of something on Merlin's face. That night, a grand party was held in Wilson's camp. People sang and danced, chatted, and laughed. Ever since the confrontation with Steve, the resistance army's reputation soared. Many people who wanted to rebel against the nobles joined the resistance army, greatly increasing their strength. Steve and the rest didn't dare to act rashly anymore. Additionally, the kingdom's war in the north made them too busy to care about the forces in the mountains. Gravel once again became the general of the resistance army and would continue to lead the cavalry. A few days later, Gravel proposed to Darlena in front of everyone. At first, Darlena was surprised and didn't know what to do, but she still agreed. Gravel held a grand wedding ceremony for her. With everyone's blessings, Gravel and Darlena got together. Because he knew how much Darlena had sacrificed for him, he had to be responsible for Darlena. In the blink of an eye, winter came. That year's winter was exceptionally cold. The peasants were hungry and cold, but they had to pay high taxes for the nobles. Many people died that winter. In order to deepen their rule over the poor, the nobles issued a decree. That was, the nobles had the right to enjoy the first night of any newlywed in their territory. The purpose of this was to reduce the bloodline of the Northland people so that the empire's rule over the Northland could be deepened. This made the poor hate the nobles to the core. A wave of resentment slowly accumulated until the day it exploded. Chapter 67. The Third Era, 1482. The winter of that year was especially cold. The Northland people in the north of the empire felt as cold as the weather. Gravel couldn't help but feel sad when he saw it all happen. He hated this world where the nobles were rich and the commoners lived in hunger and cold. However, he felt powerless. He couldn't change anything and could only watch it happen. What Gravel didn't expect was that in just a few months, the number of people joining Gravel's resistance army skyrocketed. Every part of Norland had formed their own resistance army. Even Holf, who had a deep grudge against Gravel, had formed a resistance army near Gorgoran because he was also a native of Norland. The German Empire's influence in the Northland grew weaker and weaker. The nobles no longer had the support of the Northlanders. Finally, the chance to fight the Empire came. Morin ordered Gravel and Bethman to lead their men to attack Higher Castle, which was no longer as strong as it used to be. The Imperial troops in the castle didn't dare to come out and fight. They could only hole up in the castle. They wanted to wait for reinforcements, but where would they find any? Now, there were only 800 Delman soldiers in the castle who were in low morale and exhausted. Gravel wasn't in a rush to attack the castle. Instead, he had the captives and family members of the soldiers call for their comrades and loved ones at the castle gates. Baron Sedak killed a soldier who tried to escape to keep the morale of the troops in check. However, his actions made even more people unwilling to risk their lives for the nobles. That night, a few brave soldiers worked together to tie up Baron Sedak and Count Steve. The next day, a white flag was raised at the castle and the soldiers surrendered. Just like that, Morin's army entered Higher Castle without losing a single soldier. After entering the castle, they began to pacify and take over the city. However, there were many things that people couldn't predict. As the Northland people were the masters for the first time, they started to capture people the moment they entered the castle. Anyone who disobeyed would be killed. Earl Steve's family was also arrested. There were also some descendants of the Derman. They were originally civilians, but because they worked for the Empire, they were also arrested. The men were reduced to slaves, while the women were used for the pleasure of the Northland people. The old, weak, sick, and disabled were all killed. Sometimes, Good and evil were opposites. Good could also become evil. Count Steve's family consisted of 5 people: Steve, Cedak, Cedak's mother, Cedak's sister, and Cedak's wife. Mo Lin ordered his men to strip the 3 women of their clothes and tie them to wooden stakes in the square, allowing others to amuse them. Steve and Cedak, on the other hand, were locked up in the dungeon and were beaten up every day. Both of them were on the verge of death. Gravel saw it happen, but he couldn't stop it. This was how the world worked. Today, you might be high and mighty, but tomorrow, you might become a prisoner. Gravel was shocked. The people who were originally oppressed had become even more brutal than the previous rulers after gaining power. Now that the soldiers of the resistance army had vented their long-term oppression on innocent civilians, wouldn't more people suffer in the future? What was the purpose of this war? Soon, the victorious rebels took away all the valuable things in Higher Castle in less than 2 days. In the end, they burned Higher Castle to ashes. In the following month, rebels from all over the country followed Gravel's example. At this time, the Empire's royal family couldn't sit still anymore. Theoden the Great sent out his most trusted and most capable general. This general was called Alonso, and he was very good at commanding. After Alonso came to the north, he went through several battles with the rebels. At first, he lost more than he won, but after that, he won again and again, and the rebels were unable to recover. In the battle, Merlin was killed by the rebels. Wilson's rebels could only be led by Gravel. At the same time, Horf's side also suffered a lot. In the last battle, Darlena was taken away by Alonso's men. Alonso saw Darlena's outstanding beauty and offered her to the church. The church thought that Darlena was unclean and offered her to Theoden the Great. Theoden the Great didn't care so much. When he saw Darlena, he was overwhelmed by her beauty. At this time, the previous queen had been dead for 3 years. Theoden the Great made Darlena the new queen. In the end, Gravel was very angry and sad. His woman had been taken away by the emperor, so he led his men to attack Alonso. He didn't expect that the battle would be so close to annihilation. Gravel had no choice but to escape into the mountains with his men. A year later, Gravel and Horf met at the military camp in Gorgon. They reached an agreement to put aside their differences and formed the Northern Coalition Army. They vowed to completely liberate the Northland and make the Northland the world of the Northlanders. At that time, they didn't expect that a few years later, the Black Dragon Erdal would attack the capital of Kellendil. Theoden's whereabouts were unknown, and Alonso had to return to the capital to protect him. At that time, Gravel's opportunity would come. A new era would come, an era of freedom and dignity. Chapter 68. Across the sea from the Elven Kingdom, near the Swamp of Pain, lived a small tribe of nomadic orcs that hunted for a living. This tribe was called Thunderhammer, and they would sometimes go to the Swamp of Pain to hunt. Today, as usual, the adult male orcs were led by the young and brave tribe leader to hunt wild boars in the swamp. The ones left behind in the tribe were female orcs, young orcs, and old orcs. The hunting orcs came to the edge of the Swamp of Pain, where the air was filled with the smell of death. Every time they returned safely from a hunt, it was something worth celebrating. So every time they returned safely, the tribe would hold a bonfire party to celebrate the harvest. For the survival of the tribe, these young warriors had no choice but to risk their lives to come to the Swamp of Pain. What was different from usual was that today, these giant wolf companions were extremely restless. Giant wolves were orcs' companions, and their relationship was much closer than the relationship between humans and horses. This was because orcs would never saddle giant wolves. They thought that it was a great insult to their companions. The humidity in the swamp was very high, and it made these orcs feel very uncomfortable. Suddenly, the tribe leader found a huge hardened wild boar. He raised the javelin in his hand, aimed, and shot at the wild boar. For some reason, the wild boar didn't die after being hit by the javelin. Instead, it ran desperately into the depths of the swamp. The orcs couldn't just watch their prey slip away. Even though they didn't want to go deeper into the swamp, they still rode their giant wolves and chased after the wild boar. Just as they were about to catch up, the wild boar burrowed into a huge mound. There was a huge hole in the mound. The orcs got down from their giant wolves and walked to the hole. Suddenly, there was a heart-wrenching howl from inside. It was the wild boar's howl. The howl made the orcs shudder. Then, before the orcs could react, a black tide rushed out of the hole and swallowed the group of orcs. The tribe leader watched as all the orcs and giant wolves were drowned by the black tide. Painful howls resounded in the swamp of pain. No one knew what this was. Until the orc tribe leader's eyeballs flowed out from his eye sockets and slowly disappeared, only a pile of orcs and giant wolves' white skeletons were left. This black tide didn't stop. Soon, like a flood, it drowned the surrounding Thunderhammer tribe. All the female orcs, young orcs, old orcs, and all the living things were not spared. No one knew when this black tide would stop and when it would come. All the orcs were left with endless fear. Chapter 69. Durman Calendar, Third Era, also known as the Heroes Era, April 25, 1495. It has been 3 years since the Wings of Destruction attacked the capital. The past can no longer be changed, and a new story is about to begin. In these 3 years, the entire Northland has been controlled by Gravel's Northern Allied Army. Not only that, the Northland area under the German Empire has been officially renamed as the Kingdom of Northland, and the king is the famous Gravel. Our demon hunter's blade has become stronger and stronger, and we often receive bounty missions from various kingdoms. This time, we came to the bramble forest of the Elven Kingdom for such a mission. My comrades and I have been lying in ambush for nearly a week to capture the target. Our campsite is not far from a cave. This cave is not big, and even Kelvin is unable to enter it. However, our target this time is inside this cave. Because the bramble forest is a tropical rainforest, we are not used to the humid environment. Fortunately, we have Mayfair here. Mayfair constantly uses purifying spells to dispel the diseases in our bodies, so that we won't fall sick before we even see the face of the target. Today, as usual, it is close to sunset. We thought that the target will not come out, so we decided to temporarily remove our disguise and return to the campsite. But just as we were about to get up, a sound came from the cave entrance. Good heavens, a huge red head popped out from the cave entrance. It is a huge red viper with black stripes all over its body. Our target this time is this black-spotted viper, because a magician spent a lot of money to buy its gallbladder and magic stones. Once the target came out of the cave, all of us immediately entered the zone. This is already the first time we have worked together, and our cooperation is becoming more and more skillful. A fireball quickly flew towards the black-spotted viper. This is Natalia's fireball spell. The fireball accurately hit the black-spotted viper, but as a B-rank magic beast, the black-spotted viper's body is extremely tough. Magic beasts are not ordinary beasts, they often have a certain level of magic power, and their bodies are 100 times stronger than normal beasts. According to the strength of magic beasts, they are divided into 5 ranks, S, A, B, C, and D. Among them, S rank is the strongest and D rank is the weakest. We have never seen an S rank magic beast before. Legend has it that S rank magic beasts can destroy a town effortlessly. In addition, the most valuable part of a magic beast is the magic stones on its body. The magic stones are the source of their magic power, and can release a large amount of magic power. It is a very valuable resource. Immediately after, Frant rushed forward and protected Natalia with his shield. I was in charge of attacking the black-spotted viper's flank with my sword of retribution. As I fiercely hacked down, the tough scales of the black-spotted viper actually caused the web between my thumb and forefinger to go numb. Now, as loud as I can. I can't heads black-spotted vipers. The frost arrow hit the black-spotted viper's head, and the black-spotted viper's stamina was somewhat depleted. Avina did a good job. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I once again brandished the black-spotted viper's head. This time, I finally left a deep wound on its head. The black-spotted viper was completely enraged by us, but it was powerless as Natalia's fireball hit it once again. Finally, with a loud bang, the black-spotted viper fell to the ground unwillingly. Standing on top of the black-spotted viper's body, I stepped on its head and used all my strength to slash at its neck. Finally, the snake's head was cut off. Even without its body, the snake's head was still able to move. Its perfect reflexes showed that it was born for battle. Flance and I worked together to deal with the black-spotted viper. Its poisonous fangs were carefully handled by me, and the venom was collected by Mayfair. Its magic crystal and snake gallbladder were quest items, so Natalia was keeping it safe. As for its skin and snake meat, we didn't let it go either. After eating a hearty meal of snake meat roasted by Kelvin, we packed our bags and prepared to return to collect the bounty. The capital of the Elven Kingdom, Avinia. A group of 6 people rode on 5 elven horses. Kelvin and Avina rode on the same horse as we arrived at the elven city of Hope. Hanging from my horse was our spoil of war, the huge head of the black-spotted viper. "We're back," Kelvin said happily. At the same time, on the other side of the sea, in the land of the beast men, a huge black tide engulfed the beastmen's towns and tribes. In the main city of the beastmen's land of Zagru, the beastman chieftain, the Tauren chieftain, the beastman chieftain, the beastman general and several other important figures were discussing countermeasures. The beastman chieftain didn't have much clothing on him. Due to the humid and hot environment here, his perfect figure was undoubtedly exposed. His explosive muscles, the wolf tooth necklace on his neck, and the tattoos on his face, all of which told the unknown story of his life to everyone who saw him. However, the most eye-catching thing was the scar on the beastman chieftain's face, from his forehead to his right eye. It was a testament to what kind of battle he had experienced. "Lord Victor, this black tide is approaching our main city. If we don't think of a way to stop it, our beastmen race will face extinction." The one who spoke was the beastman General Bork. The beastman chieftain Victor looked pensive and turned his gaze to the Tauren chieftain. The current situation in the beastman's land was like this. Due to the Wings of Destruction, Black Dragon Erdal's sudden attack on the German Empire's capital, Kellendil, the situation in the various provinces was very unstable. The beastman's land was still under the control of the Empire for the time being, and the human garrison of the Moonblade Fortress was in charge of supervising it. The internal situation of the beastman's tribes was like this. Several of the larger tribes still had their own way of governing. Although there were wars from time to time, most of the time they didn't interfere with each other. Only the Beastmen tribes and the Tauren tribes had formed an alliance. At the same time, they were also the largest faction in the Beastman's land. They had the right to manage the Beastman's land, while the administrative power was still in the hands of the Empire. Therefore, the Beastman chieftain had to consider the feelings of the Tauren chieftain when making any decision. "My people are suffering. I fully support Victor's decision." The Tauren chieftain spoke in the Beastman language that he still wasn't very familiar with. With the Tauren chieftain Marie Blackhoof's words, the Beastman chieftain Victor felt as if he had eaten a pill of reassurance. "Then we will immediately send people to the Moonblade Fortress and ask for help from the human garrison." The Beastman chieftain finally made his decision. "But we aren't too familiar with the humans. Who is qualified for this mission?" The Tauren chieftain asked. "I know of a candidate. He is the most suitable." The Beastman General Bork said. "Who?" "He is." Chapter 70. It's actually him. General Bork, I've never doubted your strategic decisions. But this time, I feel that even if everyone in the world could complete this mission, he's the only one who's not up to it. The Tauren chief's Beastman language wasn't very good, but this time, he said it all in one breath. The Beastman chief Victor's expression was also very complicated. This was because even the chief had heard of this Beastman that the general had recommended. This Beastman was called Batulu. He was originally a wolf rider and was a member of the chief's wolf army. He used to have a glorious status, but now he was like this. People who heard his name felt as disgusted as if they had eaten a fly. It was all because of that incident. During the annual tribute ceremony of the Beastmen, the most elite Beastmen would escort a year's worth of taxes to the Moonblade Fortress. At the time, Batulu was still very young, and it was his first time participating in such an important mission. The wolf army lined up outside the gates of the Moonblade Fortress to deliver the taxes to the human Archon. When it was Batulu's turn, he accidentally farted in front of the Archon. The fart was very loud, but everyone pretended that they didn't hear it. But that wasn't the worst part. What happened next was the most terrifying part. Cthulhu's fart was like a flood breaking through a dam. He let out a series of farts. This time, the human guards couldn't help but laugh. This time, Cthulhu had lost all face for the beast men. After returning, Cthulhu was expelled from the wolf army. After that, Cthulhu disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a laughingstock. But now, at this critical moment, the Beastman General Bork actually recommended him to complete such an important mission. The Beastman chief trusted Bork, but this time, he couldn't help but hesitate. "Bork, can you tell me why you recommended him?" Victor asked. "Sir Chief, Cthulhu's fame among the humans surpasses all of us beast men, and his strength can't be underestimated. If it really doesn't work, we can use force if necessary. In addition, he's very smart and can speak the human language. He's also very adaptable." Bork said seriously. "This Cthulhu is that strong? How do you know?" The Tauren chief asked. "Because he's my little brother," Bork said. For a moment, the two chiefs were silent. "All right, let him go. But before you go, you have to sign a contract. If you can't complete the task, you'll be beheaded in public." "Yes, War Chief." Bork accepted the order. "Isn't beheading in public a little too severe?" The Ox Chief immediately tried to smooth things over. "Lord Marley, military orders must be obeyed." After receiving the order, Burke went to make the necessary arrangements. The next day, the people selected by Burke were ready to go. They were only waiting for the chief's orders. Cthulhu didn't ride on the wolf's back. Instead, he walked side by side with his wolf companion. On his back was a crescent axe. Brave warriors, you have seen the current situation. A critical moment for the survival of the beast race has arrived. Whether or not the beast race can survive this crisis will depend on you. Set out, may the beast god bless you. The Orc chieftain bid farewell to the members of the rescue mission at the city gate of Oglu. Cthulhu patted his giant wolf companion. It was a frost wolf with snow-white fur. The frost wolf lowered its body, and Cthulhu leaped onto the frost wolf's back. The frost wolf let out a long howl, and Cthulhu and the other wolf knights dashed towards the Crescent Blade Fortress. Cthulhu and the others didn't stop to rest until they reached the legendary indestructible Crescent Blade Fortress. When they arrived at the Crescent Blade Fortress, Cthulhu and the others saw a few Imperial soldiers beating up an old orc herdsman. Not only that, but the Imperial soldiers were also loading the herdsman's sheep onto their carts. One had to know that this was the only place suitable for raising livestock in the Orklands, and those sheep were all the herdsman had. The actions of the Imperial soldiers were simply forcing the herdsman into a dead end. Cthulhu called for the troops to stop and dismounted from his frost wolf. At that moment, one of the wolf knights signaled him to mind his own business. The mission was more important. However, Cthulhu ignored him and continued to walk toward the group of soldiers. The soldiers beating the herdsman suddenly felt a chill run down their backs. They turned around and saw the tall and mighty Cthulhu. "You! What are you doing? Get out of here, or else." One of the Imperial soldiers was startled at first, but he quickly regained his arrogant and despotic appearance. "Or else what?" Cthulhu lifted the soldier up with one hand. The soldier kept struggling. Seeing this, the other soldiers all pulled out their weapons. "Sigh, this Cthulhu, I knew it wouldn't be a good thing to send him here." One of the wolf knights muttered to himself, but he was still prepared for battle. Cthulhu threw the soldier like a sandbag to the other Imperial soldiers. "Get out of here, or I'll throw your head next time," Cthulhu said. The Imperial soldiers were scared witless and ran towards the fortress in a sorry state. "You've got guts. Tell me your name, stinky orc," the soldier shouted as he ran. "My name is Cthulhu, you better remember it." Cthulhu helped the old orc herdsman up and said to the soldiers, "Are you all right? Are you all right?" Cthulhu asked. "Warrior, thank you for saving me, but I'd rather die. Without those sheep, I'll still be dead in the end. Even if we don't have any sheep, we can still raise more." But if you lose your life, then you'll lose everything. Just you wait, one day, this grassland will belong to us orcs. Cthulhu looked at the Moonblade fortress not far away. Sigh. The old orc herdsman sighed sadly. Cthulhu, we should go. The other wolf knights stepped forward to remind him. I have some silver coins here, you can use them to save yourself. Cthulhu took out some silver coins and gave them to the old orc herdsman. This. The old orc's hands trembled. Before he could say anything, Cthulhu and the others had already left for the gate. Cthulhu? The old orc herdsman felt that this name was very familiar. He seemed to have heard it somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. Moonblade Fortress, main gate. This place was guarded by fully armed Imperial guards. It was a world of difference compared to the second-rate troops that bullied the old herdsman. No wonder the orcs had no choice but to obey the rule of the German Empire. These Imperial guards were all very elite troops. Whether it was in terms of equipment, appearance, or training, they all retained the pride of the Odin the Great. Stop! What are you doing? A tall armored guard shouted at Cthulhu and the others. Chapter 71. At this time, everyone had already sobered up. Since it was already a habit, everyone quickly entered battle mode. Natalia cast an arcane illumination spell, and the surroundings immediately became much clearer. These spiders were far more terrifying than we had imagined, and I was almost stung by one of their stingers. Actually, when I was following Highside the Elder, I had heard about these large spiders that lived in the swamps. Their poison was so terrifying that it could even kill people. Not only that, with the help of the illumination spell, I saw that there were far more than 8 stinger spiders. There were at least 20 of them. I didn't have time to think and immediately swung my sword of retribution at a spider that was trying to attack me. I used all my strength in this attack, and the spider was directly split into 2 halves. The spider's juices sprayed everywhere. At the same time, Flance used his shield to block the huge and ugly tentacles of the stinger spider. Natalia was behind Flance, and with one hand, she released a flame impact spell. The spider was roasted by the flames, and a burnt smell wafted out. Kevin and Avina were behind me, shooting at the group of spiders. The 3 of us formed a triangular formation. This way, we could protect each other's backs. This tactic was the result of our long experience in actual combat. About 2 or 3 stinger spiders died under Avina's hands because their bodies were full of ice arrows. However, Kevin's side wasn't so optimistic. The firearm he invented only managed to seriously injure 1 stinger spider. Because the stinger spider's shell was relatively hard, the firearm's penetration power wasn't enough, and it took a long time to reload. If it wasn't for Avina taking care of Kevin's side, he would have been injured by these stinger spiders. Mayfair was also hiding behind Flance. Our Sir Knight was very competent, and he always fulfilled his duty of protecting the 2 mags in the team. Because our defense was flawless, these spiders didn't hurt us. Of course, this was thanks to the timely appearance of the Iron Wolf mercenary group. Their actions gave us precious time to catch our breaths. Fire arrows streaked across the night sky and pierced through the bodies of the poison spike spiders. None of the arrows missed their targets. At the same time, the warriors who were brandishing their dual swords also crazily brandished their dual swords and chopped at those spiders. Very quickly, with the help of the Iron Wolves mercenary group, those spiders were either dead or heavily injured, and the rest disappeared into the endless night. Hello, we are from the Iron Wolf mercenary group. My name is Avina, and this is Loser. The elven girl who also used a bow and arrow like Avina said. However, unlike Avina, this golden-haired elf girl used a flaming arrow. If not for her timely help, I would have been seriously injured. Nice to meet you, we are members of the Demon Hunting Blade Brotherhood. My name is Natalia. Thank you very much for your help. My name is Larrick. Thank you. My name is Avina. I'm Flance. I'm Mayfair. It's my turn. I'm Kelvin, the great inventor. Haha, nice to meet you too. I'm Loser. I'm a warrior. That was how we and the Iron Wolves mercenary group got to know each other. That night, they brought us to the Iron Wolves mercenary group's camp not far away. Since it was already late, we wrapped ourselves in sleeping bags and went to sleep in a temporary tent. That night, we slept very soundly. When we woke up the next day, the sun was already high in the sky. We lifted the curtain of the tent and walked out. The dazzling sunlight felt good, even though it was still a little damp. The mercenary group's camp wasn't big, and there were about 40 to 50 people. Sharpened wooden fences were erected around the camp, and there were mercenaries taking turns to guard the camp. At this time, Avina saw that we were all awake. She came over and told us that breakfast was ready. She told us to go to the mercenary group leader's tent to eat breakfast. The 6 of us followed Avina to the leader's tent. The tent was very spacious. There was a large round table in the tent, and breakfast for 7 people was placed on the table. To my surprise, this legendary mercenary group leader wasn't as scary as I had imagined. On the contrary, he was very easygoing and easy to get along with. He had a thick beard on his face, and his body exuded an aura of vicissitudes of life. Everyone hasn't eaten breakfast yet, right? I haven't eaten either. Come, sit down and eat together. The mercenary group leader called Avina and invited us to sit down. Don't be shy. I don't have any delicious dishes here. It's just some simple dishes. Everyone, eat as much as you want. I'll take care of everything here. After the 6 of us sat down, the mercenary group leader began to speak. Since I hadn't eaten a decent meal for several days, I began to eat heartily when I saw such a sumptuous breakfast. Thank you for your hospitality, leader. This time, we didn't come here just to eat such a sumptuous breakfast, right? Natalia said. Eat your fill first. After that, we will talk about the next mission. The mercenary group leader said. Just like that, we ate a full breakfast. The amount of food that we ate really shocked the mercenary leader, but he was very happy. Through the conversation at the table, we learned that this legendary heroic mercenary group leader's name was Fawns. After eating our fill, we began to discuss the next related matters. It turned out that the Iron Wolf mercenary group had been stationed in the Misty Swamp long ago under the guidance of Prophet Bolans. The reason was simple. Prophet had sensed that the power of darkness here was restless. The ancient power seemed to have been corroded by the aura of the devil, and an evil power was awakening. This time, we demon hunters Blade had received the leader's orders to come here and investigate. In the next period of time, we will conduct a thorough search of the Misty Swamp to find traces of the power of darkness, and eliminate them as soon as possible. After knowing what we were going to do next, Fawns had Avina arrange our accommodations and told us to take a look around the camp. The camp was pretty good. Some mercenaries even set up stalls to sell their spoils of war. In short, the atmosphere in the camp was harmonious. The mercenaries had a good relationship with one another. However, a small boy caught everyone's attention. That boy sat alone in the corner of the camp. He sat there blankly, not saying a word. His name is Marcalis. Don't disturb him. His parents died when the wings of destruction attacked the royal city. He witnessed their deaths with his own eyes. It was the guild leader who found the wandering Carlos and brought him back to adopt him. Marcalis never talks to others. It's best if you don't provoke him. He's very special. Avina saw that we were curious and explained to us. Ivina even emphasized that the child was very special. Chapter 72. That little boy, Marcalis, was really special, but that was something we didn't know until later. Over the next few days, the demon hunting Blade and the Iron Wolf mercenaries patrolled the perimeter of the camp, looking for traces of the dark forces in the Misty Swamp. Today, it was Ivina and my turn to patrol the western perimeter of the camp, while Avina and Luza were in the same team. The Misty Swamp was called that because of the large temperature difference between the surface and the ground. The heat evaporated into steam and condensed into a large amount of fog. It was easy to get lost in the Misty Swamp. Ivina and I stayed close to each other, afraid that we would get separated. Are you from Avinia? No, I live in a small village near the bramble forest. I'm a wood elf, Ivina said without hiding anything. Although the comparison between wood elves and high elves sounded like the comparison between the rich and the poor among humans, the discrimination between elves was very mild. Evina's appearance might only be considered average among elves, but she was definitely one of the top beauties among humans. I felt that her body and agility were her greatest assets. She was much more agile than Evina. Not to mention, her figure was comparable to Natalia's. Perhaps she was a little embarrassed by my gaze, but she didn't dare to look me in the eye. "Do you humans like to stare at girls like this?" Evina said. "I'm just admiring. I have no other intentions. If you dare to have any other thoughts, my bow will not be polite." Evina gestured at me. On the other hand, Evina and Luza were together. "Beautiful lady, it is my honor to be in the same team as you." Luza followed Evina like a pug. "You remind me of a sled dog I used to have. Its name was Sim," Evina said with slight disdain. "Where is it now?" "It signed a contract with me and became my summoned beast," Evina said. "You won't turn me into a summoned beast, will you?" Luza looked at Evina timidly. I had to admit that Evina had changed a lot in the past few years. From the waitress of the Green Dragon Tavern, to the helpless girl on the Nameless Island, to the independent archer in the Blood Castle, to the battle-hardened mercenary now. "Not for now, but it depends on your performance," Evina said with a smile. "Good." Luza broke out in cold sweat. "We searched like this for about 3 days, but we still didn't find any clues." On the 4th day, Luza rushed back to the campsite alone. Everyone else hadn't gone out to search, so they were basically all in the camp. Luza panted and said that something bad had happened, that they were in trouble, and that Evina had called him back for help. Luza, Evina, Luza. Lotha led us to the southwest side of the camp, where we finally saw Evina. She was struggling to hold on, and there was a beast man we didn't know fighting side by side with her. We had only heard of the beastman race before, but we had never seen one with our own eyes. Now that we saw the appearance of a beastman with our own eyes, we were shocked. The beastman had green skin, a tall and burly body, fangs protruding from the corners of his mouth, and explosive muscles all over his body. In particular, this beastman was riding a snow-white giant wolf. The giant wolf's movements were agile and ferocious. The beastman and Evina had their backs facing each other. Surrounding them was another group of red-skinned beast men that didn't ride giant wolves. These red-skinned beast men should be the legendary evil beast men. They were originally the martyrs of the beast men race who died in battle, but were eroded by the unknown demonic energy of the misty swamp and turned into monsters. The few of us didn't say a word and immediately rushed forward. Flance and I rushed to the front. I raised the sword of retribution and slashed at the evil beast men in front of us. Something unexpected happened. This group of evil beast men didn't have a physical body. The moment the beastman was cut by the sword of retribution, he turned into a cloud of black gas and dissipated in the fog. My sword missed and almost cut my waist. This reminded me of the Ghost Rider in Boheap Town a few years ago. Flance didn't rush forward to attack, but held his shield in front of me. At this time, the evil beastman that disappeared suddenly appeared in front of us. Natalia's fireball flew behind us and hit the evil orc's body. Without exception, this group of evil beast men were immune to magic. The fireball passed through the evil beastman's body as if it passed through a cloud of smoke and fell on the swamp behind the evil beastman. For a time, everyone attacked the 9 evil beast men that surrounded Evina and the strange beastman. The evil beast men were unscathed, but a mercenary was hit by the giant axe in the evil beastman's hand, and his whole body was cut in half. At this time, Mayfair remembered an ancient magic. Undead Dispel. Mayfair chanted a complicated incantation. With a white light, the group of evil beast men was instantly turned into ashes, leaving only Mayfair weakly half-squatting on the ground. Great! The mercenaries cheered. I was also very happy because Evina wasn't hurt. After everyone buried the mercenary's body, they walked back to the camp. The beastman also followed behind us. Evina told us how she met the beastman. She and Luza were patrolling together when they heard the sound of weapons clashing. They followed the sound and found the beastman. After returning to the camp, The beastman put the giant wolf outside the camp because the mercenaries didn't agree to let the giant wolf in. The beastman followed Ivina to the leader's tent and saw fawns. "It's you, Baturu." "Fawns, I didn't expect to meet you here." As soon as the two of them met, they gave each other a warm hug, making us stunned. I didn't expect fawns to have beastmen as friends. Baturu told fawns the purpose of this trip through the foggy swamp. He came to find reinforcements. He also told fawns about the disaster the beastmen had suffered and the Moonblade Fortress's human indifference. Also, he was the only one left of his team of wolf knights. Everyone had sacrificed themselves on this expedition. The foggy swamp was truly filled with danger. Not only were there evil beastmen, but there were also other dangers. In short, Baturu was very happy to meet an old friend again. That day, Baturu ate a full meal at the camp and chatted with fawns until late. Chapter 73. We packed up early in the morning because a new journey was about to begin. In the morning, Captain Fawns gathered all of us and told us a piece of exciting news. He told us that the beastmen were suffering unprecedented hardships, and that this was most likely related to the power of darkness that we had been searching for. For this reason, we had to pack up and prepare to set out. We had to pass through the misty swamp and head to the ancient beastman's land. The mercenaries had already started packing up the resources that could be taken away from the camp. Just the tents and food in the camp were enough to fill several large carriages. Soon, all of us had finally packed everything that could be taken away from the camp onto the carriages. The majestic carriages and groups of mercenaries advanced toward the west of the misty swamp. The journey was relatively peaceful. We didn't encounter any evil beastmen or poison spike spiders. After traveling for about 5 days, we arrived at the main city of the beastmen, Sajaru, with the Iron Wolf mercenary group. Sajaru meant City of Warriors in the beastmen language. It was built with the blood of the beastmen's martyrs. However, when we actually stood before the walls of the beastmen's city, what we saw was very different from what we had imagined. "How could this be? What happened?" Batulu said in fluent human language as he looked at the broken walls of Sajaru in shock. "I didn't think it would be so fast," Fawns said. Batulu didn't say anything else and quickly rushed into the city on his frost wolf. The beastmen on the watchtower saw the beastmen rushing over, so they didn't shoot at them with their ballistae. However, the beastmen soon discovered a group of humans not far away. They immediately entered a state of alert. Fortunately, the group of humans stopped outside the city. Fawns saw that Sajaru's city walls were heavily guarded and ordered the mercenaries to set up camp 2.5 kilometers away from the city. When Batulu rushed into the city, he was scared silly by the scene in front of him. He didn't think that after not returning for more than 10 days, this place would become so devastated. Burned houses, crying female beastmen, and piles of beastman corpses on the streets. All of this made Batulu's heart feel like it was being stabbed. He arrived at the chief's hall and saw a guard covered in wounds standing guard there. Batulu walked in and saw the Orc General Bulwark and the Minotaur chief sitting there with worried expressions. Seeing BA2 walk in, Burke was shocked. Then, he went wild with joy and hugged BA2. He couldn't believe his eyes. BA2 was actually still alive. It turned out that the wolf knight that had gone missing when Batulu set out from the Moonblade Castle had returned to Oglu alone. Because he was afraid of being punished, he told the Beastman chief that the humans did not agree to send troops to aid the Beastmen. In a fit of anger, he even executed Batulu. When Burke heard that his younger brother had been killed by a human, he was completely dumbfounded. For a moment, anger and sadness filled his heart. He begged the Orc chief to avenge his brother. The Orc chief once again sent the wolf cavalry to the Moonblade Fortress to demand an explanation, but this time they didn't come back with any. There was only a well-equipped human army and the corpses of the wolf cavalry. In the next 3 days, the human army launched a fierce attack on Ojaru. It wasn't until the 4th day that the Orc army finally couldn't withstand the fierce attacks of the humans. The city gates were broken through by the human army. The Empire's army rushed in and began to burn, kill, and pillage the orcs. In the end, the orc chief Victor was captured and taken to the Moonblade Fortress as a hostage. Along with him were a few hundred orc children. One had to know that these children were the future foundation of the orc tribe. The human commander had the orc general Bulwark sign a treaty. The treaty stated that 50 carriages of gold would be handed over in a month. Otherwise, the orc chief and his children would all be executed. Just as he was feeling distressed, Cthulhu suddenly came back. "I'll go chop off the head of that idiot who lied about the military situation." Bulwark thought of the wolf knight who came back and said that Cthulhu was dead, but he slowly sat down. This was because that wolf knight had already sacrificed himself to protect the orc chief during the war. This was the nature of the orcs. They didn't have to follow the orders of their superiors, but they had to be loyal to their own people. Every orc was a brave warrior and worthy of respect. Bulwark also told Cthulhu that after the human siege ended, the black tide engulfed Sargeru. Although the orcs managed to defend Sargeru in the end, the black tide was just the beginning. This was only the first part of the black tide. The black tide turned out to be an army of insectoids that had appeared out of nowhere. No one knew when the black tide would return, and no one knew if the orcs could still hold on. After Cthulhu understood what had happened these days, he told his brother not to worry and that everything would be fine. He had already brought reinforcements. After hearing Cthulhu's explanation of the reinforcements, Bulwark fell silent for a while. "I don't care if they're humans or elves. As long as they can help us fight against those hateful bugs and the humans of the Moonblade Fortress, they're our friends," the Tauren chief said after listening. "All right, this is a special time. We need to unite all the forces we can," General Bulwark said to his brother. That night, Fawns came to the orc chief's hall under Cthulhu's invitation. On the way, Fawns saw injured orcs everywhere. Those orcs looked at Fawns with hostility. "Don't mind them. After all, we were just robbed by the humans," Cthulhu said to Fawns. "I can understand. I would do the same if it were me." Fawns didn't take it to heart. When he entered the hall, Bulwark and the Tauren chief had been waiting for him for a long time. Bulwark sized up this tall and sturdy human. His first impression of Fawns was quite good. The orcs were a race that revered strength. They had a natural respect for the strong. "Hello, General Bulwark. I am the leader of the Iron Wolves mercenary group, Fawns. My brother has already introduced you to me. We are very grateful for your help. At the same time, we are willing to help you as much as we can," Bulwark said. Just like that, the leaders of both sides met, and the atmosphere was quite harmonious. Right now, aside from the black tide, the humans of the Moonblade Fortress are also our enemies. "I wonder if you can stand on our side, sir?" The Tauren chief's question was a bit unfriendly. Right now, you don't have a choice. If the humans of the Moonblade Fortress want to do something, they don't need to beat around the bush, do they? Fawns countered. All right. Since we're going to cooperate, then the most basic thing is mutual trust. Without trust, we can't do anything, Cthulhu immediately said. We orcs aren't without hope. We still have a bit of hope. It's just that our tribes are too scattered right now, and we each have our own way of doing things. Anyone who can reunite us orcs will be our benefactor. We are willing to go through water and tread on fire for our benefactor, Bulwark said. Chapter 74. As far as I know, the Ursa tribe is currently worrying about food. If we can solve their problem, I'm guessing that they'll be happy to join us, said the Minotaur chieftain. All right, let's start with this Ursa tribe and reunite the various beastmen tribes and races of the past, said Cthulhu. If there's anything we can help with, the members of the Iron Wolves mercenaries and the Demon Hunter's Blade will not hesitate to do so, said Fawns. Bork stood up from his chair and walked towards Fawns. Human, you'll be our reliable ally. If you can help us beastmen overcome our current crisis, we'll go through fire and water for you. Bork extended his thick hand. Fawns and Bork clapped their hands together and swore that everyone would advance and retreat together. Just like that, our camp moved from outside Zagru City to inside the city. Even though there are still many beastmen who are looking at us with hatred, they should be understood. Fawns told us what Bork had said, and also agreed to go with us to the Ursa tribe. A day later, at the Ursa tribe in the northern part of the Beastman's territory. The Ursa tribe's territory was very desolate, with withered trees and not a single blade of grass growing. No wonder the giant bearmen here were worried about food, because there were only skeletons all over the place. Our group arrived at this land, escorting the iron rhinoceroses provided by the Minotaur tribe. Apart from the demon hunter's blade and the Iron Wolf's mercenaries, there were only the Minotaur warriors carrying large axes. Cthulhu was also with us, because he was the Beastman's representative and was in charge of discussing the alliance with the Ursa tribe's chieftain. Actually, there was one thing I'd always been curious about. That was, when did Cthulhu and Captain Fawns get to know each other, and what kind of story there was between them? Not far from us, a Ursa tribe's heavy infantry discovered our tracks. Following the low sound of a horn, something unexpected happened. Not good. Cthulhu could tell that this was the Ursa tribe's attack horn. It seemed that this group of reckless Ursa tribe had taken us for a passing merchant group. Hunger made them unscrupulous in their search for food. Everyone be on guard, Fawns told us. All of us were ready to fight, but when we really faced the enemy, our legs couldn't help but tremble. Behind a mound in the distance, dust was flying. At least 100 bearmen heavy infantry charged at us. These fellows wielding long axes and long blades looked menacing. The ground was shaking. As a mercenary, I told myself that no matter what kind of enemy I faced, I shouldn't be afraid, and I shouldn't retreat. But at this moment, I really had the thought of retreating. These giant bearmen were born tall and sturdy. They were even taller and stronger than beast men. Comparing beast men and giant bearmen was like comparing humans and beast men. It was easy to imagine how shocked the humans were when they faced the giant bearmen. Not only that, but these giant bearmen were also wearing heavy armor. I dare say that 100 bearmen heavy infantry are enough to contend against a few thousand fully armed Imperial soldiers. Cthulhu told us to stay calm and not panic. He stepped forward and explained the situation to the bearmen. Riding on his frost wolf, Cthulhu charged at the giant bearmen like lightning. He made a sharp turn and forced a group of giant bearmen to stop in front of us. He roared at the giant bearmen and said something in a language that only the giant bearmen could understand. I am the younger brother of Beastman General Bork. I have come under the orders of my tribe's chieftain to help our former comrades and brothers. Cthulhu roared at the giant bearmen. His voice resounded throughout the world. I still remembered it clearly even now. The charging giant bearmen stopped less than a kilometer away from us. We couldn't help but praise this brave beastman. A giant bearman clad in golden armor walked out of the giant bearmen's ranks. He seemed to be the legendary chieftain of the giant bearmen. What did you say? You were sent by Victor, the giant bearman asked. Yes. Our chieftain sent me here in hopes of reuniting our brotherhood, Cthulhu said. It seems that Brat Victor hasn't forgotten us old bones, the giant bearman's chieftain muttered to himself. Cthulhu didn't tell the giant bearman's chieftain the truth. Everything was planned after Victor was captured by the humans. Now that the situation was critical, Cthulhu had no choice but to lie to the giant bearman's chieftain. Why should my tribesmen and I believe you? The giant bearman's chieftain asked. Because we heard that your tribe's food harvest was low. Our chieftain sent us to transport a few dozen rhinos worth of food. We hope it can help the giant bearman's tribe, Cthulhu said. That brat Victor still has some conscience. That's right. I appreciate your kindness. I guess you didn't come all the way here just to deliver food to us, right? The giant bearman's chieftain said. Right now, the insect plague is rampant. I believe that it won't be long before the black tide engulfs the entire Beastman territory. I hope that we can unite all the comrades who fought side by side with us in the past and face this disaster together, Cthulhu said. Beastman, I have high hopes for you. You are just like Victor. Since you brought food to us when we needed it, you are our friends. We are willing to follow the will of the supreme beast god, Goodle Oaks. We will fight alongside you, the giant bearman's chieftain said in front of all the giant bearmen. All of the giant bearman's heavy infantry knelt on one knee and covered their chest with their right arm. "We are willing to follow the will of the supreme beast god, Goodle Oaks. We will fight alongside you," all the giant bearmen said together. Just like that, we finally arrived at the giant bearman's tribe under the giant bearman's chieftain's invitation. Here, Cthulhu had a new title, the son of the tribe. Many years later, Cthulhu himself said that he liked this title very much. At this moment, our arrival was like a long-awaited rainstorm in the dry land, nourishing the giant bearmen. The giant bearmen were all happy after receiving the food. They were very friendly to us. Next, Cthulhu and the giant bearmen discussed the matter of forming an alliance. The giant bearman's chieftain said that he was willing to follow the orders of the beastman's chieftain. They would advance and retreat together with the other tribes. Cthulhu told the giant bearman's chieftain that the war with the Crescent Blade Fortress would break out sooner or later. The giant bearmen should return to Sargeru and build the beastman's capital. Chapter 75. The bearman chieftain accepted Cthulhu's suggestion. The land here was too barren, and it wouldn't be able to withstand the incoming black tide. "We need to move quickly. Otherwise, the black tide might arrive before we can leave," Cthulhu said to the bearman chieftain. "Lord Olafman, our scouts have discovered a black fog 50 kilometers to the west." This was the report of a Ursa soldier to the Ursa chieftain. "All right, let's move out immediately. Inform everyone to only bring food and personal belongings. We have to leave for Sargeru before nightfall," Chieftain Olafman said. There were about 400 to 500 bearmen in the bearman tribe. The order was quickly passed down to every bearman. Among the 400 to 500 bearmen, there were about 200 bearman heavy infantry. The rest were bearman children, old bearman, and female bearman. At this time, the food we brought was being cooked in the tribe's cauldron. Every bearman was drooling as they hurriedly packed up. Soon, when it was close to evening, all of us had our last dinner in the tribe. After dinner, the Tauren escort team led the way with us, while the bearmen followed behind. After leaving the place where they lived, these giant bear people were still a little reluctant to leave. We lit torches and slowly moved forward in the night. Finally, the next morning, we were very far away from the bearman tribe. While we were resting, we saw the bearman tribe in the distance being surrounded by the black tide. Soon, the black tide turned the bearman tribe into ruins. One could imagine what would happen if we stayed there. "We need to hurry. At this speed, the black tide will catch up to us," Cthulhu said to Olafman. And so, our team sped up and moved towards Sargeru. We didn't rest along the way. Fortunately, the black tide suddenly disappeared without a trace. Otherwise, we would definitely have been caught. We finally returned to Sargeru. Bork and Olafman met in the chieftain's hall. The bearmen temporarily settled down in Sargeru. Then, Cthulhu came to tell us that Bork thanked us on behalf of all the beast men. However, their intel said that the Cyclops tribe in the east was in trouble. If we can help them, they will surely join us. Early the next morning, we set off for the Cyclops residence. This time, it was only Fawns, Loser, Ivina, the 6 of us, and Cthulhu. After all, they didn't know what was going on with the Cyclops, so the fewer people there, the better. A group of us set off from Zagru and headed east to the Cyclops tribe. Fawns rode side by side with Cthulhu on his frost wolf. They were at the head of the group. "Fawns, do you still remember what I told you before?" Cthulhu glanced at Fawns. "I remember. You said that orcs would never saddle their giant wolf companions," Fawns said. "Thinking about it, it's been so many years," Cthulhu said. "That's right. So many years have passed since then." Fen sighed. Finally, we arrived at the Cyclops residence. A Cyclops standing guard outside asked us what we were here for. We told the Cyclops why we were here, and the Cyclops told us that their chief's child was missing. Cyclops' reproductive ability was very poor, so there were only a dozen or so Cyclops in their tribe. We understood what it meant to them to lose a Cyclops child, so we were going to see their chief. When we saw the Cyclops called Carmen, We couldn't help but feel depressed. The Cyclops' huge body was sitting there, paralyzed. Carmen's eyes were dim and lifeless, and he looked listless. When we went up to talk to him, he almost smashed us with his spiked club. Fortunately, the Cyclops guard stopped him and explained to Carmen why we were here. When Carmen heard that we were here to help him find his child, he perked up. He told us about the day he lost his child. Then he told us that he suspected that his child had been taken away by the ogres, but he couldn't find them. We listened to Carmen's story, and our guesses were roughly the same as his. The child was most likely taken away by the ogres. Thus, we immediately set out to find the ogre's tracks. Fern rode on his horse, and his expression was a bit serious. He seemed to have sunk into some memories, and we didn't dare to disturb him. That year, Fern, who was only a few years old, became an orphan because of the endless war. That year, Cthulhu was still an innocent little beastman. Cthulhu took a fancy to a toy in a human child's hand, and he cried and begged his father to get him one. But from then on, Cthulhu never saw his father again. Because the human laws were very harsh on beast men, stealing was punishable by death. Cthulhu held the toy in his hand, and he witnessed his father being executed by humans on the gallows in the plaza. Tears soaked the little beastman's heart, and from then on, Cthulhu swore to take revenge for his father. The little beastman left home, and lived alone in a human's territory. Because he was a beastman, he was bullied by humans. Until one day, Cthulhu met Fern. The two lonely little hearts walked together, and they became brothers. Later on, a kind-hearted orc herdsman adopted them and raised them. Fern and Cthulhu fought together, and grew together. They became stronger and stronger, and together they became the personal guards of the Lord of the Moonblade Fortress. They risked their lives for the Lord. However, Cthulhu couldn't forget his mission every night. He wanted to kill the Lord to take revenge for his father. However, Cthulhu couldn't do it, because he had fallen deeply in love with the Lord's daughter. A beastman fell in love with a human, and she was the daughter of his father's murderer. That day, Cthulhu told his feelings to the person he had admired for a long time, but in the end, he only got one sentence. "You're good, but we're not suitable." She said she had fallen in love with the Duke's son. "I just want to be a carefree beastman, what's wrong with that? I like to burp, fart, and sleep, what's wrong with that? I can't be a hypocrite like a refined noble son, at least I'm very real like this." Cthulhu's heart suffered a big blow. Everything had changed because of that incident. Even to this day, Cthulhu couldn't forget what happened that day. Chapter 76. It was a rainy night, and Cthulhu was kneeling on the ground in pain. His father's voice and smile appeared in his mind. It was so real and so kind. He didn't know any better, so he asked his father for a toy that a human child was holding. His father had no choice but to use his animal fur to exchange for it. Cthulhu's father told him to stay where he was and wait for him. He told him not to wander off. After a long time, his father still didn't come back. Cthulhu was scared, but he saw everyone walking towards the square. The humans seemed to be talking about something, so Cthulhu followed them curiously. There, Cthulhu saw his father and the toy that had fallen on the ground. Cthulhu's father was tied up by a rope and hung on the gallows. Cthulhu saw his father's tears flowing uncontrollably. He wanted to rush over, but an old orc hugged him from behind. No matter how Cthulhu struggled, the old beastman held him in a death grip. "Child, if you rush over now, you'll die in vain. Remember these people's faces. They killed that orc," the old orc said to Cthulhu. Cthulhu's hand was tightly holding the toy that he had picked up from the ground. It was the toy that his father had exchanged his life for. This is the consequence of challenging the law. This orc will be hanged for theft. His lordship personally supervised the execution and spoke loudly to the humans and orcs who were watching the execution. Then, the human soldiers pulled down the lever that opened the wooden plank under Cthulhu's father's feet. Cthulhu could only watch helplessly as his father died tragically in front of him. However, there was nothing he could do. Cthulhu finally understood how weak he was. Being weak meant being at the mercy of others. From then on, the old orc took Cthulhu in. Many years had passed since his father's death. One day, Cthulhu, as the Lord's guard, accidentally learned the truth of that day. It turned out that one of the Lord's friends told him that an orc had a valuable wolf tooth. The two of them plotted together to frame that orc to get his tooth. This orc was Cthulhu's father. For Cthulhu's sake, he had exchanged animal fur with a human for a toy. As a result, the greedy merchant had his eyes on his frost wolf fangs. Knowing the truth, Cthulhu no longer felt humiliated by the fact that his father was a thief. However, the rage in his heart made him want to kill the Lord at all times. But he couldn't do it because he was in love with the Lord's daughter. It was on that rainy night that Cthulhu saw the Lord's daughter and the Duke's son eating the forbidden fruit in the back garden. At that moment, Cthulhu's heart was as cold as iron. He rushed into the Lord's bedroom with his crescent blade axe and chopped off the Lord's head. Fawns was the first to rush in. When he saw Cthulhu holding the head of the Lord, he told Cthulhu to retreat first. Fawns and Cthulhu had grown up together. Fawns often saw Cthulhu wake up in cold sweat from nightmares in the middle of the night. At this moment, he could understand Cthulhu's actions. And at this time, a servant passing by discovered that the feudal lord was dead. He panicked and shouted for help. The rest of the guards rushed in. They saw Fawns holding the feudal lord's head. A group of people rushed at Fawns, but they weren't his match. A few days later, the news of the feudal lord's death shook the entire Crescent Blade fortress. What was even more shocking was that the one who killed the feudal lord was his personal guard, Fawns. And so, Fawns became a wanted criminal. Under Fawns' cover, Cthulhu returned to the orcs' homeland, Sargeru. There, he met his long-lost brother, Bork. Later, the feudal lord's son succeeded him and became the current feudal lord. The feudal lord's daughter married the duke's son, further strengthening the Crescent Blade fortress. The desperate Fawns came to the Mercenary Association and established the Iron Wolf Mercenary Group. The reason it was called the Iron Wolf Mercenary Group was because when they were young, Cthulhu had taken Fawns to the Frost Wolf tribe to look for giant wolf companions. It was also on that day that Cthulhu said that orcs would never saddle their giant wolf companions, because it was an insult to their companions. In a later mission, Fawns' giant wolf companion died in battle. In order to commemorate his old friend, he named his mercenary group Iron Wolf. Every time Fawns thought back to the past, his expression would be so serious. Perhaps it was better to forget some painful memories. In the end, we followed the tracks and found the ogre's residence with great difficulty. It was a broken cave. Outside the cave was a quagmire. What surprised us was that the Cyclops child we were looking for was even bigger than the ogres. These ogres were playing with the Cyclops child in the quagmire. They didn't seem to have any intention of eating the Cyclops. We let out a sigh of relief. Just as we wanted to take the Cyclops child away, the ogres weren't happy. The ogres were not happy. They swung their big clubs at us. We didn't hold back and beat the ogres into submission. They knelt and begged for mercy. Just like that, we brought the Cyclops child back to his home. When Carmen saw that his child had returned safe and sound, he danced with joy. In order to express his gratitude, he was willing to join us. As long as there was a need, the Cyclops would fight for the rise of the Beast Men. After bidding farewell to Carmen and the others, we returned to Zagru. We received news that the next black tide was about to arrive. We had to hurry and contact the Tiger Men and Harpies. However, these two tribes were currently at war. It was said that they were dueling for territory. Each side would send a warrior from their tribe for a fair one-on-one duel. The winner would have the final say. Burke told us that as long as we sent a warrior to defeat them, they would naturally join us. As a result, the question of who to send became a problem that troubled everyone. Right now, in order to resist the coming black tide, most of the troops couldn't go. Even if they did, it would be useless. Thus, only the Demon Hunting Blade and the Iron Wolf Mercenary Group were suitable. At this time, Makaros, who had been silent in the corner, raised his head and said that he wanted to try. Fawns was shocked, But he still agreed to let a child like Makaros go. We didn't understand, but we trusted Fawns. Fawns told us that Makaros wasn't a simple child. He had another name, Dragon Chaser. He also told us that when the time came, we would naturally know Makaro's strength. As a result, our group arrived at the border between the Tiger Men and Harpies. Chapter 77. When we arrived at the border between the Tiger Men and the Harpies, we saw that the warriors of the two tribes had already set up their own camps. We first arrived at the Tigerman's camp and were questioned by the camp guards. "What are you here for?" the Tigerman guard asked. "We're here to help you resolve this dispute." "Hurry and call your chief to see us," Fawns said. The Tigerman didn't think much of it, but he wasn't so relaxed after that. Because Evina's arrow hit his helmet, he was so scared that he immediately went to report to his chief. After a while, a tall Tigerman followed by a group of guards arrived at the camp entrance. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" "We don't welcome humans here," the Tigerman chief said to us in Beastman language. "Tiger Fang, your memory isn't that good." "Look at who I am," Fawns also replied in Beastman language. The Tigerman chief carefully looked at Fawns, and his expression suddenly changed. "I didn't expect it to be Lord Fawns." "Hurry and open the camp door," Fang said to his subordinates. We were confused and couldn't understand what the two were talking about. Later, we learned that the Tigerman chief had spent some time in the Iron Wolves mercenary group when he was young. Just like that, Tigerman warmly welcomed us. We told him the purpose of our visit, and Tigerman was very grateful. He told us that as long as we could defeat the damned Harpies, he was willing to lead the Tigermen tribe to support Sajaru. Fawns told Tigerman that he had decided to send Markalis to fight the Harpies' warriors. Tigerman looked at the expressionless Markalis, and couldn't help but be puzzled. Why was Fawns so confident in this child? Fawns said that Markalis had a title called Dragon Chaser because he was struck by a scale from the Wings of Destruction when he was young. However, Markalis didn't die, and instead chased him for several hundred meters with the scale before collapsing. One had to know that even an adult would have no chance of survival after being struck by a scale from the Wings of Destruction. So Markalis definitely wasn't an ordinary child. He was a child who had been contaminated and corroded by the Black Dragon's scale. The next day, the Tiger Men and the Harpies began a duel at the border. As for the Harpies, Harpy Queen Nisha personally took the field. On Tiger's side, he sent Markalis. Before the Harpy Queen could say anything, Makaros had already charged forward with his bladed claws. The Harpy Queen didn't take it to heart when she saw that it was just a child who was so reckless. Makaros was like a bolt of lightning, completely different from his previous gloomy appearance. His speed was very fast, and just as he was about to close in on the Harpy Queen's Yishaw, he used Sky-Piercing Dance. This move sent the Harpy Queen into the air. In an instant, the Harpy Queen spread her wings and dodged Makaro's attack. Harpy Queen Nisha took advantage of the opportunity to cast Chain Lightning on Makaros. Makaros saw the Harpy Queen flying in the sky, and before he could react, he was struck by the Harpy Queen's lightning. Makaros twitched in pain and fell to the ground. Tiger broke out in cold sweat. He couldn't have lost just like that, right? Markalis felt pain all over his body. He was most afraid of things that flew in the sky. He recalled what happened that night. In order to protect the young Markalis, his mother used her body to block the black dragon scale that fell from the sky. That scale pierced through his mother's body and pierced his chest. Blood flowed out from his body, but he couldn't tell if it was his mother's or his own. At that time, he had recklessly chased after the Wings of Destruction. He wanted the Wings of Destruction to return his mother to him. After running for who knew how long, Makaros lost consciousness and collapsed. After waking up, his body had mutated because of that scale. Every night, he was tormented by the pain of the mutation. In fact, it was already a miracle that he was able to survive. Fawns met Makaros and adopted him. Makaros was very different from other children of his age. He wasn't cheerful or lively, and his heart was filled with hatred. From then on, He only wanted to find the wings of destruction and avenge his mother. This was also why he was called the Dragon Chaser. Just when everyone thought that Makaros was going to lose, he stood up. His body shone with a black light. This was his blade shield, and his body seemed to have a metallic luster. He absorbed the Harpy Queen's chain lightning, and with a charge and leap, he rushed towards the Harpy Queen who had yet to fly away. A blade of void flew out from Makaro's body and pierced towards the Harpy Queen Nisha. The Harpy Queen hurriedly dodged, but the blade of void suddenly disappeared. Just like its name, it suddenly appeared on the Harpy Queen's left side. The Harpy Queen couldn't be bothered to dodge, and directly attacked Makaros with lightning. Makaros gathered all the strength in his body and used infinite edge. Countless throwing knives flew out from Makaro's body and pierced towards the Harpy Queen. The Harpy Queen couldn't dodge in time and admitted defeat. Just like that, according to the rules, we won against the Harpy Queen. This dispute ended with our victory. Soon, the Tigerman's tribe and the Harpy Queen's tribe joined us. Burke met with the Tigerman Tiger and the Harpy Nisha in Sajaru's chieftain's hall. This time, the Beastman's strength increased greatly. This time, the Tigerman's tribe brought winged dragon knights to the Beastmen. This was an army made up of tiger men. The tiger men rode ironback winged dragons and used spears to attack the ground. As for the Harpies, they were a highly mobile magic army. This greatly increased the Beastman's confidence. Burke and the others were very happy. Everyone gathered together to discuss the next step of the battle. In the end, Burke recalled that a long time ago, the Beastmen and the Goblin tribe had a contract. Because the Beastmen's ancestors had helped the Goblins, the contract stipulated that the Goblins should bravely step forward when the Beastmen were in trouble. We found the Goblin tribe and discussed this contract with their chieftain. In the end, the Goblins agreed to provide financial and resource support, because the Goblins were very good at collecting and doing business. They had a large amount of money and resources, and they would also provide a Goblin ambush army. We finally gathered the Beastmen of the past. During this time, we experienced many difficulties, but we still succeeded. We could finally turn our attention to the source of this disaster, the black tide that had engulfed the entire Beastman's territory. Before this, the humans in the Moonblade Fortress were also eager to give it a try. However, they didn't know that the black tide was about to attack them. As for what the future would hold, let us wait and see. Chapter 78. Not long after we gathered the various Beastmen tribes, a special group of Beastmen came to Sajaru. Their leader was a Beastman shaman called Leo. Shamans were a sect unique to the Beastmen, and the god they believed in was the beast god Goodalox. The reason this shaman was special was because he came from a special tribe. That was the Thunderhammer tribe. The Thunderhammer tribe was a tribe near the Swamp of Pain, and was also the first tribe to be destroyed by the Black Tide. The people Leo brought with him were the survivors of the Thunderhammer tribe, and most of them were shamans. Bork and all the other tribe chiefs met with Leo in the chieftain's hall, and Leo told them a shocking piece of news. As it turned out, the Black Tide had spread from the Swamp of Pain. At that time, the Black Tide that filled the sky attacked the Thunderhammer tribe. As it turned out, the Black Tide was made up of countless insects. Among them were the commonly seen bloodthirsty killer mosquitoes, hornets, giant black ants, scarlet-eyed black scorpions, and so on. There was another type of insect that Leo and the others had never seen before. They called them undead worms. These worms were very small, but there were a lot of them. Moreover, they could lay eggs on corpses, and the eggs they laid would quickly hatch new undead worms. A group of undead worms could quickly gnaw a living beastman until only bones were left. What was even more troublesome was that their shells were very hard, and they weren't easy to kill. Leo also told us that the Black Tide had become even more rampant than before, and that Sajaru would soon face a battle. This information was very important to us, and Leo also discovered that the Black Tide's movements were periodic and regular. If we wanted to completely deal with the Black Tide, we would have to go deep into the Swamp of Pain to investigate the source of the Black Tide. Fawns said that the investigation of the Swamp of Pain could be left to the Iron Wolf mercenaries and the Demon Hunting Blade, because our goal this time was to investigate the source of the power of darkness. Bork and the Ox Chief also agreed with Fawns, because they wanted to use the main force of the Beast Men to resist the Black Tide. Soon, all the tribes agreed that Leo would lead the way, and the Iron Wolf mercenaries and the Demon Hunting Blade would go to the Swamp of Pain. On the same day, we left Sajaru under the gaze of Baturu and the others. Baturu chose to stay here, because he had to fight for his tribe. At this moment, Sagru had already entered Level 1 alert. Everyone knew what they were going to face next. That night, Bulka and Batulu were still patrolling the troops. The Beast Men were all desperately preparing for battle, each busy with their own matters. Some of the orcs were sharpening their axes, some were practicing combat techniques, and some were transporting war supplies. Finally, Batulu came to the encampment of the Wolf Army. Wolf Knights were the pride of the Beast Men. They were the elites of the elites. Most of them were members of Baturu and Bork's Frostwolf clan, as well as some members of the Bloodwolf clan and Berserker Wolf clan. Every clan's name was derived from the name of the wolf clan that had been raised by the family for generations. The Frostwolf was snow white and agile, the Mad Wolf was grey and powerful, and the Bloodwolf was red and bloodthirsty. The Orc Chief Victor was from the Bloodwolf clan. Unfortunately, he had been captured by humans. The chiefs of the other clans were also on standby in their respective barracks. The entire Sajaru was preparing for the coming Black Tide. The old, weak, women, and children of the various clans had already been transferred to Sajaru's underground caverns. Everyone who could participate in the battle was rubbing their palms. On the evening of the second day, the Black Tide approached Sajaru. No one expected the Black Tide to arrive so quickly. Standing on Sajaru's tall watchtower, one could see a black swarm of insects moving towards Sajaru at an astonishing speed. Soon, the city's alarm was rung. War had arrived. Quick, quick, get on the city walls and prepare to meet the enemy, Bork said. At this moment, the Tigermen Chief Tiger, the Bearmen Chief Olafman, the Minotaur Chief Marie, and the Harpy Queen were already on the city walls, preparing to meet the enemy. The Cyclops Chief Carmen was waiting below the city because of his enormous size. Very soon, the boundless Black Tide had already arrived at the city. The black mass at the front should be the bloodthirsty killer mosquitoes and hornets. The catapults on the city walls had already been loaded. They were only waiting for Burke's command. Fire! Following Burke's command, the flags and bugles began to issue orders. Burning stone balls smashed towards the dense swarm of insects. Some of the insects nimbly dodged. However, there were too many insects. Many of the mosquitoes and hornets were still hit by the fireballs and fell to the ground. Following closely behind were even more insects and a large number of undead corpses. These were the most troublesome enemies. At this moment, the tiger men riding ironback winged dragons had already risen into the air. These were the winged dragon knights they were so proud of. The harpies weren't willing to be outdone. They all flew into the air and released chain lightning. Under Tiger's lead, the winged dragon knights continuously poured oil into the swarm of insects below. Then, they threw down torches, instantly creating a sea of fire. The chain lightning released by the harpies together was extremely powerful. Swaths of insects were electrocuted and fell to the ground. However, there were too many insects. There was no end to this swarm. Soon, the winged dragon knights and the harpies started to run out of stamina. We can't kill them all no matter what. Moreover, it feels like the more we kill, the more insects there are. It's as if all the insects in the Beastman land are gathering here, Harpy Queen Nisha said. Beastman warriors were constantly being engulfed by the insects and reduced to bones. The number of Beastman casualties rose rapidly. Not only that, but scarlet-eyed black scorpions and giant black ants also appeared on the ground. These scarlet-eyed black scorpions were extremely large in number. Their venom was extremely strong, and they were also very small in size. As for the giant black ants, they were about the same size as the Cyclops. They directly attacked the city gates and city walls. Many of the city walls had already been damaged. At this moment, there were battles everywhere. The Beastman warriors were fighting a bloody battle. Gudarox. Burke shouted the beast god's name. At the same time, he swung his battle axe with both hands at the giant black ants. The Cyclops were the main force fighting the giant black ants. 2 or 3 of them had already died in battle. The goblin ambushers threw bombs at the scarlet-eyed black scorpions, killing many of them. Just as everyone felt that there was still hope, they suddenly felt the sky darken. What kind of monster was this? That moment of despair spread through everyone's hearts when they saw this monster. This monster could only be described as terrifying. With a loud bang, the city gates of Sajaru were shattered by this monster. Chapter 79. Under Leo's lead, we finally arrived at the cave in the heart of the Swamp of Pain. Outside the pitch-black cave was a pile of corpses. Everyone had a bad premonition. Leo told us that these should be the beast men of the Thunderhammer tribe. Farns lit a torch and shone it into the cave. This was a bottomless cave. Fortunately, the air in the cave was still flowing. Thus, we split into 2 groups. One group stayed outside the cave, while the other went inside to see what was going on. In the end, Kelvin, Mayfair, Shaman Leo, Makaruv, and a portion of the mercenaries stayed outside the cave. Flance, Natalia, Avina, Farns, Luza, Evina, and I decided to enter the cave with a group of high-ranking mercenaries. Using the weak light of the torch, we pushed deeper into the cave. As we went deeper, we discovered that this underground cave was shockingly large. However, we didn't notice that we had become prey in the eyes of others in the darkness. The city gate of Sajaru collapsed under the gaze of all the beast men. Every beastman was deeply shocked by the huge monster in front of them. It was a huge centipede that had just crawled out from the ground. For a moment, the battle between the beast men had reached its most difficult point. Whether we could survive or not depended on whether we could completely eliminate the source of this black tide. Bulka waved his dual axes. He could only place his hopes on us. For victory, he had to persevere even if it meant death. Not good. Something is following us, Farns, who was at the front, said to us. Because the light was too dim, the rest of us didn't notice. Farns' warning told us to be ready for battle as we advanced. Kelvin, who stayed outside the cave, wasn't convinced. He wanted to go into the cave like us. However, Farns said that he was too young and that it was better to stay outside. However, Kelvin didn't know that this was the Swamp of Pain. There was no place that was absolutely safe. A moment of carelessness, about a dozen huge green swamp frogs surrounded Kelvin and the others. The mercenaries and the frogs began to fight. These mercenaries could be considered veterans, but they were all splashed with the poison spat out by the frogs. Once the poison touched their skin, it would immediately blister and fester. Many mercenaries fell down one after another, suffering unbearably. Makaruv immediately made his move, while Mefel immediately used purification to detoxify the mercenary. Makaruv was facing a dozen poison swamp frogs by himself. These frogs had amazing jumping ability. It was indeed troublesome. Makaruv seemed to be struggling. Kevin shot a poisonous swamp frog that was about to pounce on Makaruv with his firearm. Makaruv looked back at Kevin but didn't say anything. Makaruv activated Blade Shield while unleashing Infinite Edge. Streaks of cold light shot towards the poison swamp frogs, and the ground was littered with their corpses. Makaruv fell weakly to the ground. Using such power was still a little too much for him, and he was also in danger of being devoured by the Wings of Destruction's mana. After taking care of the wounded soldiers, Mayfair immediately went to treat Makaruv. She couldn't care less about the exhaustion of her stamina and mana. Makaruv looked weakly at Kelvin and thanked him in a small voice. A heart that had been frozen by fear was slowly melting. At the same time, our situation in the cave wasn't any better. Suddenly, there was a scream. A high-ranking mercenary at the back of the group was instantly pierced through the chest. I looked in the direction of the torchlight. It was a monster with the lower body of a spider and the upper body of a human woman. "It's a spider banshee," Irina said. Everyone immediately started fighting the several hundred spider banshees. We fought as we ran deeper into the cave. The spider banshees were so agile that we couldn't shake them off. Many mercenaries were killed by them. If it wasn't for Ravina's arrow at the critical moment, I would have lost my life as well. Soon, due to the difficult battle and the lack of light, we were left with less than 20 people. Suddenly, a huge cave entrance appeared in front of us. Light shone through the cracks on the ground, illuminating the place. With our backs to the cave entrance, we started fighting the spider banshees who were chasing after us. However, the spider banshees seemed to be afraid of light and the cave entrance. They scattered and disappeared into the darkness. Let them run. We need to hurry and find the source of the black tide, Fawns said. It should be here, Loser said. In the end, we decided to enter the cave entrance. Many years later, Leo, who became the great shaman of the beast men, called the monster we were about to face the terror bug king, Zulfao. Of course, Leo only saw the corpse after we dealt with the horrifying bug king. If he saw the living Zulfao, he would have been even more shocked. After entering the cave entrance, the light inside was very good. Using the faint light, we were all stunned by the scene in front of us. A monster 10 times bigger than a cyclops was lying there, sleeping peacefully. We didn't dare to breathe for fear of waking him up. Later, Fawns told us that these should be the ancient insect tribe. This huge monster called Zulfao was the same as the spider banshees. They had the upper body of a human and the lower body of a spider. However, the spider banshees were only slightly bigger than humans. This Zulfao's body was terrifyingly huge. Zulfao was the last ancient insect king. The ancient insect tribe only had one male king. The rest were all females. The spider banshees could only reproduce by relying on the king. The ancient insect king would never truly die. They would only continue to be reborn unless they were killed. This was because when their lives were about to end, they would eat a large number of spider banshees and form a cocoon around themselves. Then, they would be reborn. We saw that on the other side of the cave, there was actually an exit. However, even if we knew the entrance, we wouldn't be able to enter. The cave entrance was a huge and densely packed spider web. Countless beastman and spider banshee corpses were hanging on it. There were also some corpses that couldn't be identified. We looked at each other. We wanted to kill the big guy while he was sleeping. However, when we actually attacked, we realized that it was too simple. With a violent shake, the huge monster was slowly waking up. The soldiers of Nogren shouted as they struck the ground with their halberds. Baturu could understand human language, and he was very annoyed. Don't waste words with them. Let's fight. Batulu said to his brother, Bork. Humans on the walls, listen up. Hand over Chieftain Victor and the hostages and surrender immediately, and I can spare your lives. Bork shouted, and had Baturu translate for the humans on the walls. Batulu unwillingly translated it to the humans, and the only response he got was an arrow that landed at his feet. The war has already begun, Bork said. The orcs pushed out their catapults and began to bombard the Crescent Blade Fortress. Due to their biological structure, the orcs almost never used bows and arrows. However, their crossbow manufacturing process was very mature, and because of their great strength, they were very good at using crossbows. Moreover, the orcs mostly used heavy crossbows and siege crossbows, which were very powerful. The leech-like crossbow bolts shot towards the city walls, and the war began just like that. This kind of long-distance siege wasn't very effective, because the Empire's troops wore winged helmets, black heavy armor, and metal shields. Soon, the Tiger Men, led by Chieftain Tiger, rode on ironback winged dragons and prepared to attack the Crescent Blade Fortress. The winged dragon knights dodged the arrows shot from the city walls and flew above the Crescent Blade Fortress, where they threw the black gunpowder bombs provided by the goblins into the city. For a moment, the city was covered in a sea of fire, but what they didn't expect was that there were several airships in the fortress. These airships were very high-tech. They were equipped with heavy ballistae and could hold a few hundred soldiers. The giant airships rose into the air, and countless arrows and ballistae shot towards the winged dragon knights. Those who didn't dodge were hit and fell to the ground. The winged dragon knights began to throw their spears back, and they took full advantage of their speed. Both sides suffered casualties. Following the fierce bombardment of the catapults, the originally damaged city walls quickly began to show gaps. At this moment, Bork ordered the wolf knights to charge. Baturu rode on his frost wolf and charged at the front. Brigadier General Harov also ordered all the heavy cavalry to go out of the city and meet the enemy head-on. The beast men had already started a full-scale siege. The Cyclopes were responsible for attacking the city gates with the Taurans under the cover of the armored ironback rhinoceroses. The bearmen heavy infantry were responsible for attacking the city walls. The beastmen infantry were also responsible for setting up siege ladders, while the beastmen crossbowmen were responsible for providing cover. The Harpies led the goblin ambushers to sneak into the city and cause chaos in the Crescent Blade Fortress. The Crescent Blade Fortress was a sea of fire, and the sounds of crying and fighting were incessant. The Wolf Knights and the Durman heavy cavalry clashed. Both sides were very strong, and neither side gave in at all. It was hard to tell who had the upper hand. As for the Bearmen heavy infantry, although their equipment wasn't as good as the Durman elite soldiers, their physical conditions were much better than the humans. Although the battle was a bit difficult and not as easy as expected, the Bearmen quickly gained the upper hand. The Beast men continued to pour into the city, engaging in street battles with the Empire's soldiers. Finally, the city gates were smashed open by the Cyclopes, and the majority of the Beast men rushed into the Crescent Blade Fortress. At the same time, a heavily damaged airship fell from the sky, and a Cyclops was smashed to death on the spot. Following that, the Beastmen army surrounded the Lord's Hall like a flood. That was the last place the Empire's soldiers were defending. Seeing that they were going to lose, and that the reinforcements wouldn't be able to arrive in time, the Lord was disheartened. He gave the order to kill all the non-human captives, including Victor. Victor seemed to have been mentally prepared. In fact, he was the one who told Bork the plan. He knew what it meant to be a captive of the humans. He made a final choice. In order to survive, he chose to fight to the death. He encouraged all the captive beast men to protect the next generation and resist with all their might, holding on for as long as they could. Soon, the humans were completely defeated. All of the heavy cavalry were killed, and not a single one survived. The Wolf Knights were silent. They respected their enemies, and they were honorable warriors. The Beast men fought this battle with great difficulty. However, the Crescent Blade Fortress was still taken down in the end. When the Beastmen army rescued the hostages, Victor and many of the captive Beastmen died bravely, but the hope of the Beastmen all survived. The Lord's Hall was finally taken. The Beastmen angrily rushed in and killed all who were alive. The fat Lord knelt and begged for mercy, but his head was mercilessly chopped off by a Tauran warrior. The Battle of the Crescent Blade Fortress ended with the Beastmen's complete victory. The Beastmen succeeded in gaining independence. Brigadier General Harov wanted to die as an apology for his defeat, but he was saved by his loyal subordinates. They escaped the Crescent Blade Fortress in a broken airship, avoiding the pursuit of the Beastmen. A few days later, at Victor's funeral, Bork held his coronation ceremony, and he became the king of the Beastmen Kingdom. Old lives died, and new lives were born. Baturu also gained the recognition of all the Beastmen due to his strength, and he became the new Beastman General. During the coronation ceremony, King Bork made us eternal warriors of Zagru, and made a promise. If there was a need for the Beastmen Kingdom, the Beastmen Kingdom would make any sacrifice for the Iron Wolves mercenary group and the Demon Hunter's blade. Just like that, the 6 of us bid farewell to the Beastmen Kingdom and our friends in the Beastmen Kingdom, and set foot on the road back to Borhinia Manor. At the time of our departure, we had formed a deep friendship with the Iron Wolves mercenary group. What was worth celebrating was that the Mercenary Association's commission this time was based on an S-rank reward, so we received a large reward. However, the veil of that mysterious dark energy had not been lifted yet. There were too many unknowns and mysteries waiting for us to explore. Chapter 81. All the beast men felt their blood boil when they heard this. They were going to fight for themselves today. For fairness. For justice. For freedom. The voices below grew louder and louder. After the declaration of independence of the Beastmen Kingdom was completed, the Beastmen army was ready to set out. Their target was the Moonblade Fortress. At the same time, the Moonblade Fortress had also suffered heavy damage from the Black Tide. Originally, the Lord wanted to send an army to Zagrel to ask for compensation, but he had no choice but to put it on hold. In the main hall of the Moonblade Fortress, the Lord was gorging himself on a roasted suckling pig on the long table. At the same time, there were several beautiful women serving him wine. Suddenly, an intelligence agent rushed back to report to him. The informant told the Lord that the infestation was stopped because of the orcs. It was also because of this battle that the scattered beast men regrouped. Now, the land of the beast men was no longer under the rule of the German Empire. They had become an independent beastmen kingdom and would soon attack the Moonblade Fortress. Trash. Why did you tell me so late? Men, drag him out and hang him, the Lord ordered. A few guards immediately dragged the agent away, even though he was still trying his best to explain. Chimph, you want to rebel? Think about your own strength. What a bunch of mobs, the Lord said with contempt. At the same time, the Moonblade Fortress entered a state of combat readiness. All the non-human races in the fortress were isolated and imprisoned together with Victor and the others. The Moonblade Fortress was originally a military fortress. It was one of the symbols of the German Empire's power. Therefore, its military facilities were very complete. The army was well equipped and well trained. Perhaps their lord was an idiot, but the commander of the Moonblade Fortress was not. He was a high-ranking officer with rich combat experience. The commander of the Moonblade Fortress was called Harov, and he was a brigadier general. Burke led the Beastmen army to attack the Moonblade Fortress. This was the first battle of the Beastmen Kingdom, and they were bound to win. Soon, Burke's army arrived at the city. At this time, the Imperial army on the city walls was already waiting. The battle was about to break out. The soldiers on both sides were restless. In order to dispel the fear in the hearts of the soldiers, Brigadier General Harov lectured them. Soldiers, look at the beast men below the city walls. Are you afraid? Don't be afraid. All the soldiers shouted. In this battle, we are not fighting for anything else, but for this group of rebellious orcs to invade our fortress. Our families, wives, and children are all in the fortress. For their sake, we will not let these foolish orcs return. Brigadier General Harov said. There's no return. There was no return. The soldiers of Nogren shouted as they struck the ground with their halberds. Baturu could understand human language, and he was very annoyed. Don't waste words with them. Let's fight. Batulu said to his brother, Bork. Humans on the walls, listen up. Hand over Chieftain Victor and the hostages and surrender immediately, and I can spare your lives. Bork shouted, and had Baturu translate for the humans on the walls. Batulu unwillingly translated it to the humans, and the only response he got was an arrow that landed at his feet. The war has already begun, Bork said. The orcs pushed out their catapults and began to bombard the Crescent Blade Fortress. Due to their biological structure, the orcs almost never used bows and arrows. However, their crossbow manufacturing process was very mature, and because of their great strength, they were very good at using crossbows. Moreover, the orcs mostly used heavy crossbows and siege crossbows, which were very powerful. The leech-like crossbow bolts shot towards the city walls, and the war began just like that. This kind of long-distance siege wasn't very effective, because the Empire's troops wore winged helmets, black heavy armor, and metal shields. Soon, the Tiger men, led by Chieftain Tiger, rode on ironback winged dragons and prepared to attack the Crescent Blade Fortress. The winged dragon knights dodged the arrows shot from the city walls and flew above the Crescent Blade Fortress, where they threw the black gunpowder bombs provided by the goblins into the city. For a moment, the city was covered in a sea of fire, but what they didn't expect was that there were several airships in the fortress. These airships were very high-tech. They were equipped with heavy ballistae and could hold a few hundred soldiers. The giant airships rose into the air, and countless arrows and ballistae shot towards the winged dragon knights. Those who didn't dodge were hit and fell to the ground. The winged dragon knights began to throw their spears back, and they took full advantage of their speed. Both sides suffered casualties. Following the fierce bombardment of the catapults, the originally damaged city walls quickly began to show gaps. At this moment, Bork ordered the wolf knights to charge. Baturu rode on his frost wolf and charged at the front. Brigadier General Harov also ordered all the heavy cavalry to go out of the city and meet the enemy head-on. The beast men had already started a full-scale siege. The Cyclopes were responsible for attacking the city gates with the Taurans under the cover of the armored ironback rhinoceroses. The bearmen heavy infantry were responsible for attacking the city walls. The beastmen infantry were also responsible for setting up siege ladders, while the beastmen crossbowmen were responsible for providing cover. The Harpies led the goblin ambushers to sneak into the city and cause chaos in the Crescent Blade Fortress. The Crescent Blade Fortress was a sea of fire, and the sounds of crying and fighting were incessant. The Wolf Knights and the Durman heavy cavalry clashed. Both sides were very strong, and neither side gave in at all. It was hard to tell who had the upper hand. As for the Bearmen heavy infantry, although their equipment wasn't as good as the Durman elite soldiers, their physical conditions were much better than the humans. Although the battle was a bit difficult and not as easy as expected, the Bearmen quickly gained the upper hand. The Beast men continued to pour into the city, engaging in street battles with the Empire's soldiers. Finally, the city gates were smashed open by the Cyclopes, and the majority of the Beast men rushed into the Crescent Blade Fortress. At the same time, a heavily damaged airship fell from the sky, and a Cyclops was smashed to death on the spot. Next, the Beastmen army surrounded the Lord's Hall like a flood. That was the last place the Empire's soldiers were defending. Seeing that the battle was over, and that the reinforcements wouldn't be able to arrive in time, the Lord was disheartened. He gave the order to kill all the non-human captives, including Victor. Victor seemed to have been mentally prepared. He knew what it meant to be a captive of the humans. He had already told Burke that the Beast men would take down the Crescent Blade Fortress sooner or later. He made a final choice. In order to survive, he chose to fight to the death. He encouraged all the captive Beast men to protect the next generation. They resisted with all their might, and held on for as long as they could. Soon, the humans were completely defeated. All the heavy cavalry were killed, and not a single one survived. The Wolf Knights were all silent. They respected their enemies, and they were honorable warriors. This battle was very difficult for the Beast men. However, the Crescent Blade Fortress was taken down in the end. When the Beastmen army rescued the hostages, Victor and many of the captive Beastmen died bravely. However, the hope of the Beastmen all survived. The Lord's Hall was finally taken. The Beastmen angrily rushed in, and killed all who were alive. The fat lord knelt and begged for mercy, but his head was mercilessly chopped off by a Tauran warrior. This fat lord was also pitiful. He wanted to escape on an airship, but his body was too big to move, and he was killed before he could do so. The Battle of the Crescent Blade Fortress ended with a complete victory for the Beast men. The Beast men succeeded in gaining independence. Brigadier General Harov wanted to die as an apology for his defeat, but he was saved by his loyal subordinates. They escaped the Crescent Blade Fortress in a broken airship, and escaped the pursuit of the Beast men. A few days later, at Victor's funeral, Burke held his coronation ceremony. He became the king of the Beastmen Kingdom. This was the unanimous choice of all the tribal chiefs. Old lives died, and new lives were born. Batulu also gained the recognition of all the Beastmen due to his strength, and became the new Beastman General. During the coronation ceremony, King Burke granted us the title of Zagru's Eternal Warriors, and made a promise. If there was a need for the Beastmen Kingdom, the Beastmen Kingdom would make any sacrifices for the Iron Wolves mercenaries and the Demon Hunter's blade. We were also awarded the Order of Independence, which was a testament to our glory. Just like that, The 6 of us bid farewell to the Beastmen Kingdom and our friends in the Beastmen Kingdom, and set foot on the road back to Borhinia Manor. At the time of our departure, we had already formed a deep friendship with the Iron Wolves mercenaries. What was worth celebrating was that the Mercenary Association's commission this time was based on an S-rank reward, so we received a large reward. However, the veil of that mysterious dark energy had yet to be uncovered. There were too many unknowns and mysteries waiting for us to explore. It was the beginning of a new day, and my holiday was over. I had to return to the mercenary group and start a new job. After I got dressed, I took my equipment and went to the Demon Hunter's Blade in Borhinia Manor. Coming to the mercenary group that he hadn't seen for a long time, everything was so familiar. Familiar faces, familiar voices, and familiar friends. You came so early, Larrick. How was your holiday? As soon as I entered the manor, I saw Flance. He greeted me. Not bad. How about you? I asked. During this time, I've been studying combat skills. If you have time, let's exchange pointers. Sure, we'll exchange pointers when we have time, I replied. Flance, if you want to exchange pointers, count me in. At this time, Lofis walked over to us. The former famous Singhardi pirate leader had officially become a member of the Demon Hunter's Blade. I heard that a new mysterious person came to our mercenary group, Flance said. What mysterious person? Why haven't I heard of him? I was a little confused. You don't know? Since you returned from the Beastman Kingdom, a mysterious goblin came to our mercenary group. He said he wanted to help us, Lofis explained to me. It turned out that this mysterious goblin was called Pai Rui. His so-called help was to provide us with some rare items. However, the prerequisite was that we had to give him something he needed in exchange. Goblins were really good at business. Speaking of this Pai Rui, Lofis liked him a lot. This goblin's goods were really top-notch. Although the price wasn't cheap, it was worth a try. How about we bring Larrick to take a look? Flance said. Thus, I was led to the goblin merchant Pai Rui by the 2 of them. As it happened, Avina was there as well. I saw Avina happily picking out the items she liked from Pai Rui's goods. However, when she heard the ugly goblin Pai Rui mention the price, Avina frowned. Seeing us come over, Avina put down the things in her hands and greeted us. You guys came too. Are you the only one who can come here? Lofis said. This must be the Pai Rui you guys were talking about. In order to ease the awkwardness, I immediately changed the topic to the mysterious goblin merchant. After seeing the goods displayed in the display cabinet, I was really in awe of this ugly goblin. He really had all kinds of strange things. He even had the headband that the elven great druid used. There was really nothing he couldn't get. Avina had her eyes on a necklace that the queen used to wear. That necklace was very mysterious. It emitted a white light. I didn't know what material it was made of. Since it was something that Avina had her eyes on, no matter what, I had to buy it. I didn't know why, but ever since I came back from the last mission, I had been worried about Avina. My relationship with Avina had become very subtle. We couldn't be considered lovers, but we had eaten the forbidden fruit together. Sometimes far, sometimes close, sometimes distant. What? 50 gold dragon coins? When I heard the goblin merchant Pai Rui say the price, my mouth was so shocked that I couldn't close it. 500 gold dragon coins was enough to buy the entire Borhinia Manor. It was too much. At this moment, Kelvin ran over. So, you are all here. It just so happens that the commander wants to see you. He wants you to go to his office now, Kelvin said while panting. We followed Kelvin to Hist's office. Natalia was discussing something with Hist. Mayfair stood behind the commander and listened to Natalia's words with rapt attention. You guys are here. I have something to tell you. Come in, Hist said to us. What happened next was a surprise to all of us, for what Caesar told us was too much of a shock. Chapter 83. When Flance heard the news, he was the most surprised. What followed was disgust from the bottom of his heart, because he really didn't want to hear the word church again. Hist told us that this time, we were going to work together with the Falcon Knights under the church to investigate the source of the abnormalities in the Beastman's land. Moreover, this mission was an invitation from the church that had nothing to do with us. They wanted us to go to the German Empire to assist in the investigation. Hist showed us the letter from the Pope, and we were all surprised after reading it. Everyone present had more or less heard some rumors about the church, and they didn't have a good impression of the church. This was especially true for Frant, who used to be a knight under the church. Because of this, he was the one who understood the church the most. As everyone knew, the church was the only legal religious organization in the German Empire. The church believed in the 7 gods, and the so-called 7 gods were the 7 gods who ruled over humanity. They were the god of love Rouse, the god of the hunt Hunter, the god of luck Raquel, the god of truth Pamela, the god of wisdom Wisdom, the god of sun Scene, and the god of war Erinac. This time, the church took the initiative to cooperate with us. This involved the interests of the Kingdom of Northland and the German Empire, so we could only report it to the Lord of Gorgon, Horf. After obtaining Lord Horf's approval, the leader, Hist, agreed that we should work together with the church to investigate the source of the abnormalities. There was only one person who didn't look so good, and that person was Flance. A few days later, the president asked me, Avina, Natalia, Flance, Kevin, Mayfair, and Lofis, the 7 of us to complete this mission together. Because this mission was no small matter, there were some things that Hist didn't tell us. After we packed up our equipment and luggage, we prepared to set out to the predetermined location. The leader of this mission was still Natalia, and we didn't have any objections. "How is it? You don't look too well. Is there something on your mind?" Seeing the absent-minded Flance, I went up and said, "It's nothing. I just have an indescribable feeling." Flance forced a smile at me. "When we come back, I'll treat you to drinks at the Giant Bear Hotel for 3 days and 3 nights. I patted his shoulder. The location we agreed to meet with the Falcon Knights was the Death Mountain Range in the northern part of the German Empire. The name sounded quite horrifying, but no one knew what would happen when the time came. After nearly half a month of trekking, we finally arrived at the foot of the Mountain of Death under Natalia's urging. The Falcon Knights had already set up a temporary camp at the foot of the mountain. The 7 of us arrived at the entrance of the camp. The knight guarding the door saw us and asked why we were here. Natalia took out the letter from the bishop and showed it to the knight. The knight, reading the letter in the bishop's own hand, became much more respectful and admitted us. The 7 of us dismounted from our horses, and the knight led the way in front. The knight gestured to the nearby stable boys to find a place to tie up our horses. The few of us followed the knight to the command tent in the camp. When we arrived at the command tent, the knight asked us to wait for a moment. He wanted to go in and report. Then, 3 knights walked out of the tent. The knight in the middle was wearing heraldic armor. He had a full beard and looked very calm. The knight on his left had to be mentioned. At first glance, you could tell that he wasn't an ordinary person. The knight looked very young, and his appearance was also very handsome. He was wearing a coat of heraldic armor. The most eye-catching thing was the shining eagle badge on his chest. From the moment Flance entered the camp, the expression on his face betrayed the disgust in his heart. Until he saw the handsome knight in front of him, his eyes revealed disbelief. He was the only one who knew what this badge represented. After all, it was given by the Pope himself. It was used to honor the knights who had made outstanding contributions to the church and were ranked in the top 10. The ones who had this badge were the legendary 10 Holy Knight badges of the church. So, the young knight in front of him was one of the 10 Holy Knights of the church, the Eagle Holy Knight. What an honor! In comparison, the female knight on the right didn't seem so eye-catching. Women couldn't become knights, but the female knight in front of him clearly couldn't be underestimated. The female knight was wearing plate armor and had red hair. Her appearance couldn't be considered stunning, but it was definitely the type that was worth looking at. "Hello, I am Dwayne, the leader of the Falcon Knights. "It is an honor to have you all here," the knight in the middle said. "Hello, I am Natalia, from the Demon Hunter's Blade. These are my companions." Just like that, we greeted each other. The handsome knight was called Gregory Gerard, and he was the deputy commander of the Knights of Falcon. The name of the female knight was Catherine Jones. She was the only female knight in the Order of Knights. Just as we were about to enter the command tent, there was a loud noise. Everyone's eyes focused in the direction of the gate. Then, there were a few screams. In an instant, all of us subconsciously drew our swords and entered battle mode. The camp was filled with a green light. Everyone was fighting with the enemy. "It's an invasion of vengeful spirits," someone shouted. At the same time, the alarm in the camp was rung. "I'm sorry, everyone. I hope you can protect yourselves." The leader of the knights, Dwayne, drew his iron staff and charged at the invading vengeful spirits. Chapter 84. The warhorse carried the unconscious Flance out of the barbarians' encirclement, leaving him to fight alone. Half a year later, Flance's story was widely spread in the church. The Pope even gave him a posthumous title and used him as a model. But to everyone's surprise, one day, he came back alone in barbarian clothes. "How are you? Are you okay? Be careful," I shouted at Flance when I saw him in a daze. At the same time, I used my sword to block an attack from a wraith. Flance heard someone calling his name and came back to reality from his memories. At this moment, the camp of the Falcon Knights was surrounded by countless wraith. Everywhere the green light went, it was tragic. No one knew where these wraith came from or how they would be destroyed. They wailed like ghosts and howled like wolves. There were originally more than 100 knights in the camp, but now less than half of them were left. There were too many wraith. The most important thing was that magic and weapons didn't seem to work. "Retreat. Everyone get on their warhorses." Catherine, open the door of the stable and let out all the warhorses. Commander Dawn commanded. "Yes, sir." Catherine rushed to the stable, which was littered with corpses. Catherine used an axe to cut the door of the stable. The frightened warhorse rushed out of the stable and almost hit Catherine. "Get on your horse," Catherine shouted from her warhorse. All the knights who were still alive ran in her direction and got on their warhorses. We were no exception. We ran to the stable. Gerard got on his warhorse and jumped over the guardrail. A few knights got off their horses and moved the guardrail away. The rest of the people rushed out of the camp. "Retreat to the east," Commander Dawn commanded. Flance recalled the scene that day. He came back alone. All the knights were facing a great enemy. They were no longer the comrades of the past. The Pope's order was that he had sacrificed himself for the church. He was just a shell controlled by the enemy. He ordered people to tie him up. Facing the siege of his comrades, he did not resist. Instead, he threw his weapon on the ground. After being caught, he was locked up in a cell to await his trial at night. Flance went to see him in his cell. He told Flance many things. All this time, they had only been accomplices to the Avilders, slaughtering innocent civilians. It turned out that when he fell into a pool of blood that day, the so-called barbarians did not kill him. Instead, they chose to forgive him and save him. What is a heresy? What is a true God? They were nothing more than the killing tools of the church. That night, the Pope sentenced him to be burned at the stake. "May the 7 gods forgive his sins and purify his soul," the Pope said to the crowd before the execution. Before he left, he shouted, "Fight for honor and freedom." The flames caused the unyielding man to scream in pain. In order to end everything, Flance used a javelin to end the life of his comrade. From then on, Flance was banished from the Order of Knights until Hist took him in. The horn that Flance carried with him was a gift from him before he died. He told Flance that if he felt fear, if he did not have the courage, to blow it. Blow it, and you will fight for freedom and honor. You will be fearless. At this moment, Flance blew the horn. The dawn was about to arrive. It was probably the first time the Order of Knights of Falcon had retreated so pathetically. Everyone was in low spirits. But at this moment, Avina's warhorse suddenly lost control and carried Avina to the south. I was worried about Avina, so I followed her to the south. The others continued to follow the Order of Knights of Falcon to the east under Natalia's signal. She told Flance to lead everyone while she rode towards us. The others retreated to the town of Boheap under Dawn and Gerard's lead. That was where they would be temporarily stationed. Along the way, the knights were in low spirits. This battle was too cowardly. Seeing the town of Boheap not far away, the surviving knights calmed down a little. Dawn and Gerard rode at the front while Flance and the others followed behind. "Isn't this place a little too peaceful, Commander Dawn?" Gerard asked. "It is indeed a little unusual, especially after experiencing so many things." "Everyone should be on high alert," Dawn replied. Soon, everyone entered the town of Boheap. This place was very different from before. The town guards were nowhere to be seen. There was not a single person on the streets of the town. The entire town fell into a deathly silence. "Let's stay here for the night. We'll make plans tomorrow," Dawn ordered. All the knights dismounted and tied their horses. They went from house to house and knocked. But without exception, no one opened their doors. Dwayne brought his men to an inn in the town, but there was no one in the inn. Since there was no one, Dawn told everyone to stay in the inn for the night. Gerard did not say anything, but he was very uneasy. "My friend, I'll have to trouble you to stay here for the night," Dawn said to Flance. "That's fine. Since we are partners, we should share weal and woe. Besides, there are several barrels of honey wine in the wine cellar," Flance said. "Well, take care of yourselves, my friends. If you need any help, don't hesitate to come to me," Dawn said with a smile. Flance looked at Dawn and thought of him. At night, most of the knights found a place to sleep because of the fatigue and shock from the battle. Except for the 2 knights on the first night watch who were still standing outside the inn, Flance was not asleep either. Dawn, Gerard, and Catherine were discussing something in one of the rooms. They had to find a solution for today's incident. Seeing that they had fallen asleep, Flance leaned against the window and fell into deep thought with the horn in his hand. Suddenly, he saw some green lights moving in the woods outside the window. He immediately broke away from his thoughts and focused on observing the green lights. At this time, there was a scream outside the inn, followed by the sound of a frightened horse. Flance knew that the situation was bad and immediately woke everyone up. At this time, the inn's door opened. A knight in charge of the night watch stood at the door. He stood there expressionlessly. A knight who had just been woken up went forward to check. As a result, the knight screamed in fright and immediately retreated. The knight standing at the door suddenly fell down, followed by countless vengeful spirits. Chapter 85. I rode my horse all the way south and finally found Avina under a withered old tree. Her horse had collapsed next to the withered tree due to exhaustion. When I found her, Avina was at a loss. As the sky darkened, I dismounted and saw Avina curled up on the ground, shivering. "It's okay. I'm here," I comforted her. When Avina saw me, tears welled up in her eyes. "Let's stay here for the night. We'll return to Boheap town tomorrow morning," I said to Avina. Avina nodded. Then, the 2 of us found some dried twigs. I used the flint I had brought with me to light the twigs and made a campfire. I put down the sleeping bag I had hung on the horse. By the time I was done, the surroundings had become dark. Avina snuggled up to me. I gave her half of the bread in the saddle. I drank a little of the honey wine, which was the last of my collection. The moonlight was weak tonight. Avina and I recalled the time we spent on the island. Perhaps that was the best memory we had. "Larrick, I feel like something is following me. I don't feel safe," Avina said. "It's okay. I was just like you many years ago. At that time, I had just learned how to become a mercenary from Hist. I was naturally afraid of ghosts. However, Highside the Elder's trial that night made me understand how to overcome my fear. What kind of trial? I've never heard you mention it before. Avina looked at me with interest. It was a vampire's tomb. High side the elder locked me, who was defenseless and inexperienced. I was left alone in the dark tomb, but there seemed to be countless evil spirits around me. People feel very insecure when they are defenseless and unable to see their surroundings clearly. Moreover, I was just an inexperienced young man. I was afraid, I cursed, and I did everything to give myself courage. And then, the next morning, High side the elder found me sleeping in the tomb. From that day on, he decided to take me in as his disciple. Avina was amused. She asked me how I had done it. Actually, I didn't feel good that night. I was afraid that a vampire or a ghost would jump out at any time. I was prepared to fight at any time, but I lost to sleepiness. I don't know when I fell asleep unknowingly. Old Caesar told me many years later. He said I was the second person to fall asleep in that tomb in so many years. Then who is the other one? Haha, the other is High side the elder himself. In fact, the so-called fear was just to scare oneself. Even if there really was a ghost, what was supposed to happen would still happen. It was better to face it calmly. What's more, a person isn't scary when they're alive. Do you think they'll become stronger after becoming a ghost? I said. That's true. All right, it's getting late. You should sleep early. I'll keep watch tonight. You don't need to worry. I'm afraid that you'll fall asleep while keeping watch, Avina teased. Don't worry. I won't let you get hurt. Avina obediently went to sleep, and I kept watch by the campfire. Seeing Avina sleeping peacefully, I felt much more relaxed. I didn't know how much time had passed, but I actually fell asleep in a daze. I suddenly realized that Avina was gone, and I became nervous. Green flames were everywhere, and they looked similar to will-o'-the-wisps. Not only that, but the green flames were also moving around. I pulled out the sword of retribution and prepared to fight at any time. The number of will-o'-the-wisps increased until some of them approached me. With the help of the weak campfire, I could finally see what the will-o'-the-wisps looked like. They were just scarecrows, but they weren't ordinary scarecrows. They were a type of scarecrow called a spirit scarecrow because some spirits lived in these scarecrows. That was why these spirit scarecrows could emit green light. I hurriedly mounted my horse. Riding my horse, I charged toward the places with the green light and swung the sword of retribution to kill them. Moving through the darkness, I was like a bolt of lightning at dawn, tearing these spirit scarecrows apart. Suddenly, the horse's hooves tripped, and I fell off the horse. However, the spirit scarecrows didn't stop and quickly surrounded me. My leg was injured, and it wasn't convenient for me to move. I could only slash with all my might. Just as the spirit scarecrows were about to surround me, something unexpected happened. Fireballs streaked across the darkness and hit the spirit scarecrows. The scarecrows were engulfed in flames, and they let out heart-wrenching screams. It was Natalia who saved me in the nick of time. This was something I hadn't expected. In the blink of an eye, the spirit scarecrows that had surrounded me suddenly disappeared without a trace. I was overjoyed to see Natalia, and I immediately went forward to greet her. Thank you. You saved my life, I said. Don't be in such a hurry to thank me. Where's Avina? Natalia asked. It turned out that not long after I fell asleep, Avina woke up. She saw that I had fallen asleep, but she didn't wake me up. Instead, she planned to take my place and keep watch. However, at this moment, we heard someone crying not far away. Avina listened to me and decided to overcome her fear. She lit a torch and walked in the direction of the sound. The sound was intermittent, sometimes strong, and sometimes weak. Suddenly, the crying stopped, and Avina felt a tingling sensation on her back. She slowly turned around and saw a little girl emitting green light staring at Avina. Avina broke out in a cold sweat. She hadn't expected there to be a spirit. However, Avina quickly calmed down. She decided to become a real mercenary. She chased after the little girl, but the little girl was too fast. Just like that, one in front and one behind, they arrived at the edge of a cliff. Ariwena almost fell off the cliff. The little girl disappeared into thin air. Avina looked at the scene in front of her. There was a large waterfall, and there was a small lake under the waterfall. Avina didn't know where she was. She was confused, just like before she met me. She wanted to call my name, but she was frightened by the scene in front of her. Tens of thousands of spirits, evil spirits, wraiths, and ghosts emerged from the lake. Avina was so scared that she didn't dare to make a sound. Natalia and I followed Avina's tracks. I didn't know if I could see Avina again, and I was worried about her safety. Chapter 86. It's the Undead Army. I looked at the huge undead army in front of me in astonishment. They were surging out of the lake. "Let's hide here. Otherwise, we might die here at any moment," Natalia reminded me. The endless undead army surged onto the shore. Among them were the vengeful spirits that had attacked the camp earlier, evil spirits and ghosts that were even more terrifying than vengeful spirits, the undead clan with scythes on their heads, the ghost riders that had attacked Boheap Town after the Black Dragon incident, and some terrifying necromancers. The green light of death emanating from their bodies was especially terrifying in the pitch-black night. Natalia and I looked at the huge undead army and were so frightened that we didn't even dare to breathe loudly. There were also many undead warriors and archers among the undead army. They were the backbone of the undead army. It seemed that the main battle would be a tough one. I broke out in cold sweat for the others. Just as I was worrying for the others, a ghost rider glanced at where we were hiding. I broke out in cold sweat, but I didn't dare to act rashly. Natalia was probably in the same situation as me, because we were no different from striking a rock with an egg. Our top priority now was to find Avina. We wouldn't abandon our companions. On the other side, at the front line of Vreden Castle. In this fortress that was easy to defend and hard to attack, there was a Lord's Hall built on the mountainside known as the Dawn Hall. This was the frontline command center for fighting against the undead army. The current commander here was Lord Randall Hill. He was dressed in plate armor and was leading everyone to discuss the deployment of the army. Beside him was his guard knight and cavalry captain, Roger Young. He was Randall's most trusted and proud student. On the other side, there was a gentle-looking middle-aged man. He was Randall's chief steward, Aaron Smith. This man was definitely Randall's right-hand man. There was one more person that I had to mention. This person was Randall's eldest son, Geoffrey Hill. He was a famous archer in Vreden Castle. He used a purple wooden bow to perfection, and his archery skills were superb. He was wearing a hard leather armor and had delicate features. He didn't have any of the extravagant and luxurious aura of a noble's son. Instead, he had the aura of a capable pillar. Flance and the others also stood around, listening to Randall's deployment. Randall had already sent someone to seek reinforcements from Marshal Alonso. Once Fredenburg fell, the capital of Kellendil would lose its protective barrier. At that time, the undead army would effortlessly invade the royal city. It was estimated that the Empire's reinforcements would arrive within a few days, so Randall and the others had to hold on for a few days without reinforcements. Right now, Commander Duane and the others were still stationed in Boheap, monitoring the enemy's every move in the north of Kellendil. Therefore, the battle line from Vredenburg to Boheap was especially important. The civilians and soldiers here were all prepared for battle. First, they stored all the strategic resources into the fortress and distributed the weapons to everyone. Everyone was preparing for the enemies that could attack at any time. The farmers in the villages outside were busy transporting resources into the fortress. The soldiers also stepped up their patrols and training. The flag of House Randall was flying everywhere in Vredenburg. It was a white flag with 2 blue stripes and 2 black swords crossed in the middle. In the large square in the center of Vredenburg, there was a huge statue of the god of luck, Raquel. This was the place where sacrifices and important ceremonies were held. This was where Lord Randall gathered his army and prepared to face the incoming undead army. All the soldiers and civilians of Vredenburg were rubbing their hands, ready to fight the undead army head-on. However, they didn't know what they were about to face. It had to be said that Vredenburg was a true military fortress. Whether it was the military quality of the soldiers and civilians, or the weapons and defensive facilities here, it could be called a dazzling pearl of the German Empire. The thick walls and the surrounding moat made any enemy who wanted to attack it suffer. This was the strongest barrier in the western part of the empire's capital. War had come out of nowhere. Fortunately, Flance and the other three brought the news to Lord Randall in advance, so that he could be fully prepared. Ever since the Black Dragon incident, the world fell into chaos and darkness. All kinds of evil forces appeared one after another. 3 days after Flance and the others told Lord Randall the news, the preparations for war had not been completed yet. On this night, the villagers who were desperately harvesting wheat and transporting it to the fortress saw a few wisps of green light not far away. What happened next was completely beyond their understanding. Patches of miserable green light illuminated the wheat fields. The villagers who didn't manage to escape in time were swallowed alive. Thus, the war began. The sky was filled with black crows that rushed towards Vredenburg like black raindrops. For a moment, pain and death began to spread. The villagers who were transporting food to the fortress were suddenly attacked. The terrified soldiers and the remaining people ran towards the fortress. At the same time, the soldiers on the walls saw the situation at the foot of the hill. They immediately lit the fire beacon and began to ring the alarm bell. The people who were still sleeping immediately got up when they heard the alarm bell. They picked up their weapons and prepared to fight at any time. Randall and the others, as well as Flance and the others, got up and quickly gathered at the Dawn Hall. Everyone was ready for war, waiting for Randall's orders. Geoffrey, you lead the archers on the walls and get ready. Roger, you're in charge of commanding the cavalry. Tell them to wait for orders. As for our distinguished guests, can you come with me to fight the enemy? Randall said to Flance and the others. Yes, my lord. Everyone accepted the order and went to their positions. Randall also arranged for his wife to lead the 2 children and the other women and children in the fortress to the escape route, which was the source of Vredenburg. The defenders of the fortress also went to their designated positions. Flance and the others followed Randall to the top of the walls. At this time, the gate bridge over the moat had been pulled up by ropes. The soldiers and villagers who escaped from the fortress were at the foot of the hill. Before they could cross the moat, they were caught up by the tens of thousands of black crows. The black crows swooped down and most of the people were left with only a pile of white bones. Even the armors of the soldiers were completely useless. All of this made the scalps of the defenders on the city wall tingle. It was a terrifying scene. They didn't expect to face such an enemy. Chapter 87. Randall had no choice but to order the archers to shoot. Frieden's marksmen were famous in the German Empire. They were one of the Empire's trump cards. The archers lit the oilcloth arrowheads that they had prepared in advance and shot at the black mass of creatures. The few survivors were still struggling in the moat. They knew that there was no hope for survival, but they did not want to give up. The city gates were already closed. Even if they managed to climb to the bottom of the city walls, what could they do? Moreover, the number of black crows was enough to swallow everyone on the city walls, let alone them. The flaming arrows rained down from the sky, clashing head-on with the black crows. In an instant, the black crows fell to the ground, burned to death by the arrows. The people on the city walls cheered. Even those who were still struggling at the bottom of the city walls seemed to have seen victory. What happened next made everyone unable to laugh. After being attacked, the flock of crows dispersed. A few huge green flames streaked across the sky and smashed into the city walls. In an instant, flames and cries filled the air. The siege began just like that. In the distance, the terrifying green light that filled the sky quickly covered the plains below the hill. This was an army of the dead made up of tens of thousands of vengeful spirits, evil spirits, and ghosts. They seemed to have come from the void. Their bodies were light, or rather, they did not have bodies at all. They directly swept across the moat. Stop them. Shoot. Randall immediately ordered when he saw this. However, in the face of the mighty army of the dead, even the flaming arrows seemed to be useless, let alone the huge trees and rocks. Soon, the dead broke through the defense of the moat. They crossed the moat and surged into the city walls that had been damaged by the green flames. The few survivors outside the city were swallowed by the dead in the first wave. Not even a trace of them was left. The soldiers in the city formed a shield wall and used their bodies to block the gap. The surviving archers tried their best to shoot at the dead souls, but the arrows passed through them and were ineffective. Some of the arrows even pierced through the Fryden soldiers below them. The dead bit and stabbed the Fryden soldiers. Accompanied by the sound of armor shattering and painful screams, the soldiers fell one by one. The place had become a slaughterhouse. There was nothing Randall could do about these dead. He could only reluctantly order a retreat. When the retreat horn sounded, everyone retreated to the north gate of the castle according to the plan. That was the only place that had not been surrounded yet. The soldiers were making their last stand. Obviously, humans were not prepared to fight against the undead. So far, no one had successfully defeated any of the undead. The bodies of the dead soldiers were everywhere. Roger Young led the cavalry out of the north gate and lost a lot of men and horses along the way. Randall and Geoffrey also led the soldiers down from the city wall and rushed to the north gate. On the other hand, Flance, Lofis, Kevin, and Mayfair were retreating while resisting the undead. They had succeeded in dispersing some of the undead. However, they were mercenaries after all, and ordinary soldiers couldn't do anything about it. The four of them fought as they retreated, leaving corpses all along the way. The undead had already occupied more than half of the castle, and the north gate of the castle was jammed with retreating soldiers. Panic was written all over the soldiers' faces. Many of them had been trampled to death by their own people. At this time, if the undead surrounded the north gate of the castle, none of them would be able to escape. Time was of the essence. Everyone just wanted to get out of this damned place as soon as possible. On the other hand, the old, the young, the women, and the children who had gone to the escape tunnel in advance would soon be able to escape. Although they heard a lot of noise above, they didn't know what was going on above. However, the undead also found the entrance of the escape tunnel, and a green light poured into the dark tunnel. The old, the weak, the women, and the children heard the noise behind them and quickened their pace. But just as they were about to come out of the tunnel, the undead caught up with them. For a time, flesh and blood were flying everywhere, and a large number of women and children were slaughtered. Only a few people in front of them climbed to the surface, and they quickly closed the door of the escape tunnel. The leader was Lord Carina's wife and the Lord's two children. They saw the cavalry led by Roger Young not far away. They shouted desperately, and Roger Young immediately led the cavalry and rushed over. At this time, the gate of the escape tunnel behind them was broken by the undead. The undead immediately rushed to these women and children. Roger Young led the cavalry in front of these people and stopped the undead. He picked up the Lord's two children and put them on the horses. The other children were also put on the horses by the cavalry. People kept falling down, and it seemed that they couldn't hold on any longer. "Run. Don't worry about us. Take the children and run to a safe place," Lady Carina shouted. Roger Young knew that this was the only way. Otherwise, they would all die here. "Take the children and retreat," Roger Young helplessly ordered. The surviving cavalry followed Roger Young and ran away. Behind them were the slaughtered women and the cavalry who didn't have time to retreat. The feeling in his heart was very uncomfortable. This was the most aggrieved battle Roger Young had ever fought. They retreated all the way to the east. The flag was broken, and many people died of infection, hunger, and thirst. They didn't expect that they would be defeated so thoroughly. The food in the castle didn't work at all. On the other side, the army led by Randall fought all the way and finally escaped from the castle. More than half of the army was lost, and many people would stay in the castle forever. Fortunately, the undead didn't chase after them after they escaped. Otherwise, they would have lost many soldiers. Flance and the other lords led the remaining soldiers to retreat to the east. People kept falling down. A few days later, everyone seemed to have reached their limit. They hadn't drunk water for a long time. Just when they felt that everything was dark, Roger Young led the cavalry and arrived in time. It turned out that Roger Young and the others had met the Imperial Army who had come to reinforce them. The commander of the Imperial Army was Brigadier General Harov. After returning from the Moonblade Fortress to Kellendil, Marshal Alonso didn't blame him. Instead, he saw that he was a talent and put him in an important position. After Randall and the others were rescued, they settled down in the Imperial Army's camp. They discussed the battle with Brigadier General Harov. However, the atmosphere wasn't very harmonious. Brigadier General Harov was very dissatisfied with the results of the battle. No matter how Randall described the undead, he would only conclude that the army of Fredenburg was useless. After hearing the news of his wife's death, Randall became gloomy and dispirited. He began to be depressed and full of pessimistic thoughts. But now he had nowhere to retreat. Fredenburg's soldiers were also dejected and their morale was low. Brigadier General Harov didn't realize the seriousness of the problem. He still wanted to teach Fredenburg's army a lesson. The Imperial Army's camp wasn't far from Fredenburg. Brigadier General Harov sent scouts to investigate the situation every day. Chapter 88. A few days later, a scout came to report that a green light could be seen wandering in the distant forest at night. Brigadier General Harov had followed the Empire's orders to set up a defense line here to stop the undead army from expanding. Even though they hadn't fought with the undead yet, Brigadier General Harov was fully prepared for this war. Reinforcements from various places were arriving. Together with the original troops, there were a total of 30,000 Empire soldiers stationed in this open land. The continuous military barracks had turned this place into a temporary small city. The soldiers were busy preparing the defenses. Everyone was confident about the upcoming war, except for Fredenburg's army. After Randall failed to communicate with Harov, he led the remaining troops to Boheap town, which was the main point of the defense line. Obviously, Harov didn't want to work with Randall, so he could only acquiesce. Together with the cavalry led by Roger Young, Fredenburg's army was left with less than 1,500 men. They were the last of Fredenburg's bloodline. Natalia and I walked along the cliff next to Sevis waterfall, looking for the way down to Red Moon Lake. Finally, after a few days, we arrived at the vast shore of Red Moon Lake. To our surprise, it seemed to be very peaceful here, except for the usual gloomy atmosphere. We followed the clues along the way, following the traces that Avina might have left behind. After so many days of searching, we still couldn't find her. Just as we were about to give up, we heard a little girl crying in the withered forest not far away. Natalia followed me into the depths of the forest, which was filled with withered trees. We really saw a little girl with her back facing us around a pitch-black cave at the border between the forest and the mountain range. She alternated between a crisp laugh and a sorrowful sob. Natalia and I didn't dare to act rashly, so we decided to observe for a while. Suddenly, the little girl turned around and disappeared before our eyes. The blood-red crows on the trees all flew away, and a chill assaulted us. I mustered my courage and felt that I had to investigate, even though my heart was filled with fear. I gripped my sword tightly and walked to the entrance of the cave. Natalia was also prepared for battle and followed behind me. The pitch-black cave was filled with the smell of decay. I lit a torch. The cave was not narrow, and there were many white bones scattered on the ground. There was also some unknown green viscous liquid hanging around the walls. What happened next was completely out of my expectations. The Avina that we have been searching for so many days has actually appeared in front of us like this. Avina's clothes were in tatters. The only thing left on her upper body was the elven leather armor I gave her. Her lower body was barely covered, and her snow-white thighs were exposed. Harov ordered his subordinates to set up a second line of defense. The traps by the gate were pulled up, and a huge trench with poisonous thorns appeared under the feet of the undead. The soldiers at the gate used large rocks and logs tied to the fence to smash the enemy. But these preparations were useless against the undead. Soon, a large number of evil spirits and ghosts broke through the gate. The Empire's soldiers could only suffer, twist, and die. Fear spread to everyone's heart. So this was the undead, this was death. What followed was a complete defeat. Everyone wanted to escape, but it was too late. The ghosts were the souls of dead soldiers. They were rotten, and the weapons they used were soul-turned rusted weapons. They also looked like skeletal undead wearing rusted armor. They didn't have a physical body, but they could easily use soul weapons to attack the living. The Empire's soldiers made their last stand, desperately slashing at the non-existent enemies with their weapons, only to be pierced to death by the non-existent enemies. The evil spirits were more evil, and their resentment was deeper than the wraiths. Seeing the large number of undead, Brigadier General Harov felt incomparable despair for the first time, even more so than when he was surrounded by the Orc army. On the other side, in the town of Boheap, Natalia and I finally returned with Ivina. After going through so many hardships and narrowly escaping death, we were happy that we were able to find Ivina and that she was still alive. I don't know if it was the elven leather armor that protected her or if she wasn't fated to die, but it was fate that brought us together again. Because Flance and the rest had followed Randall's army to Boheap, the people of the Demon Hunting Blade could finally regroup in Boheap. In this small town, the people of the church, the Demon Hunting Blade, and Lord Randall's men were gathered here to fight against the undead. There was also something that we didn't expect to happen here. When Natalia met Lord Randall, we found out something that we didn't know. It turned out that Natalia was also of the Hill bloodline. I didn't expect that Natalia was also of noble birth. However, from Natalia's aura, we could tell that she had an extraordinary background. But we didn't expect her to be a member of the Hill family of the German Empire's Frieden. Natalia's mother was Randall Hill's elder sister. Natalia grew up under the care of her family. She was full of curiosity towards new things from a young age and had a strong aptitude for magic. Once again, by chance, Natalia met a mage from the Magic Academy. Natalia wanted to become a mage very much, because she felt that mags were all people with vast knowledge. It wasn't easy to become a mage. First of all, one had to have an affinity with the magical elements and an extraordinary spiritual force. Magical elements covered the entire world, but ordinary people couldn't sense their existence. Only those with extraordinary talent or those who had undergone special training could sense them. The meaning of magic was to use one's powerful spiritual force to control these magical elements and condense them into a richer mana in one's body. That was why mana was almost like a second life force to a mage. Magical elements were basic materials contained in heaven and earth, but they were very unstable and difficult to be used directly. Mana, on the other hand, was a stable product that could be used directly after being controlled and polished by one's spiritual force. Therefore, the strength of a mage was often determined by the strength of one's spiritual force and the mana in one's body. Of course, elemental affinity was especially important at this time. Only when one's elemental affinity and spiritual force were strong enough could one's ability to condense and transform magic into their own mana be strong. That was why ordinary people were often destined to have no chance of becoming a mage in their life because of their elemental affinity, let alone spiritual force. As for releasing a spell, it was through means such as using one's spiritual force to release the mana in one's body to form a spell. Therefore, chanting spells and so on was just a means. The original source was still to use spiritual force to release mana to form a spell. Our Natalia was the same as most people. If she wanted to learn magic, she had to go through an elemental affinity test. After the test, our Natalia has a high affinity with the fire element. Her spiritual power is also 6 times higher than that of an ordinary person's spiritual power under the magician's test. Therefore, Natalia's aptitude was extremely suitable to become a mage. This young mage successfully became Natalia's mentor and guide on the path of magic for Natalia. However, the Hill family was a conservative and stubborn family. They were too traditional and revered magic at the same time. Natalia was an anomaly. Even her mother didn't understand her. Natalia felt very lonely. Only her mentor accompanied her and enlightened her, giving her a glimmer of hope. As time passed, the two young hearts formed a deeper bond with each other. They were all brave warriors who were not afraid of death, but they died for no reason. Flance and I didn't have time to talk to each other. Everyone was busy with their own things. Just like that, the undead army charged toward Bohep before we could think too much about it. The dark sky was covered by a sky full of black crows. When the bell rang, everyone picked up their weapons and prepared for battle. Almost everyone here had fought against an undead army before. At this moment, there was no fear in our hearts. Instead, we were prepared to die. A rain of fire arrows killed countless black crows, but the number of dead crows was far fewer than the ones that flew over. Many soldiers had their eyes pierced by the black crows that descended from the sky. In the end, their skulls were bitten to pieces, and their brains exploded. Then, the black undead clan, the goat-headed people who came from hell with large scythes, charged into the town. The soldiers swung their weapons at them, but their heads were cut off by the undead clan's scythes. Although many of the knights were stronger than the Fredenburg veterans, the situation was almost the same. The ground was littered with the corpses of human soldiers, the Falcon Knights, and the Fredenburg soldiers. Roger Young led the last of Fredenburg's knights in a relentless charge. However, other than killing some of the undead clan and Black Crows, there was nothing they could do to the undead wizards, and ghost riders that appeared next. Catherine Jones of the Falcon Knights held an iron battle axe in her right hand and a steel shield in her left. Her face was already covered in blood. Some of it was her own, while some of it was splashed by her comrades. She had already taken off her guard's helmet. She used her shield to block the attack of a Black Crow and hacked it to death with her iron battle axe. Wearing heraldic armor and a huge helmet, Dwayne rode on his war horse. With a charge, he pierced through the body of an undead clan member with his heavy lance. Then, he took out his iron staff and smashed the head of the goat-headed person who was still alive. The people of the demon hunting blade also got into a battle formation. I held my sword of retribution and my round shield at the front. Flance fought beside me, while Natalia and Kevin were responsible for long-range support from behind. Lofis was responsible for their safety. We were the only ones who could cause some damage to the undead army. However, there were too many of them, and we were too few. Moreover, our stamina and magic were limited. Gradually, we began to feel powerless and were slowly being surrounded. We also suffered some injuries. When we saw the large number of ghost riders, I knew that we didn't stand a chance unless I could use my dragon magic. However, I couldn't control this power at all. Randall and his son, Jeffrey, were in an even worse situation. There were only a few Fredenburg sharpshooters left around them. The rest had all died in battle. The two of them were also covered in wounds and exhausted. The flag of the Hill family was tattered. It was a white flag with blue stripes and two crossed swords. The Hill family's coat of arms was two crossed black swords. They worshipped the god of luck, Raquel. There was a statue of the god of luck, Raquel, in the large square of Fredenburg. However, that place had already been occupied by the undead. Even the family motto of the Hill family was, "There is only a fine line between darkness and dawn." I wonder if the god of luck will descend again this time. Fredenburg's manager, Aaron Smith, brought Randall's two children and other old, weak, and sick people to stay in our Demon Hunter's Blade's secret base. Just as the undead army was about to step on our corpses and advance, and we were about to collapse, the Hill family's luck might have saved us. Perhaps the Hill family's luck really saved us this time. A door of light lit up in the middle of the town. This was a magic teleportation door. Someone had teleported here using magic. Who would come here at this time? Was he friend or foe? Always remember, there is only a fine line between darkness and dawn. Only those who believed in the 7 gods and were blessed by the gods could use this holy water. As for the holy water from other channels, it was a completely different matter. The Ghost Riders charged at Gerard furiously, and Dwayne, the captain of the Falcon Knights, happened to stand in front of one of them. Dwayne, who wasn't riding a horse, stood on the ground, holding his iron staff and shield as he took a defensive stance against the charging Ghost Rider. He knew that if so many Ghost Riders charged at Gerard, even a paladin would not be able to handle it. Dwayne made up his mind to kill as many Ghost Riders as he could. Just as the repulsive Ghost Rider on the Underworld Ghost Horse brandished its greatsword and was about to reach Dwayne instantly cast an advanced light spell, Barrier of Light. A huge transparent wall of light instantly blocked the Ghost Rider's path, and the Ghost Rider was thrown off his horse. Even the Ghost Rider hadn't expected this. His whole body was emitting a green light, which was particularly frightening in the dusky sky. The Ghost Rider immediately slashed at the light barrier with his greatsword, once, twice, thrice. Dwayne also kept using the magic power in his body to maintain the spell. After all, he wasn't a mage and didn't have much magic power. He was only a bit more powerful than an elite knight, and was also the captain of the Falcon Knights. Finally, cracks appeared on the light barrier from the Ghost Rider's greatsword, and with a bang, it completely shattered. Captain Dwayne didn't vomit blood, but he was seriously injured. However, he felt that he had achieved his goal by stalling for time. Now, it was time to fight to the death. This middle-aged man from Frostwolf constellation, who was born on December 15, 1450, had a full beard, and occasionally had a dry sense of humor. He probably would never have imagined what would happen in the next second. The Ghost Rider swung his greatsword at Captain Dwayne, who blocked the attack with the elite knight shield in his hand. But the Ghost Rider freed up his left hand and directly pierced Captain Dwayne's abdomen. This time, Captain Dwayne spat out a mouthful of blood. This man who liked to rub his nose when he was nervous, stubbornly liked to abide by the rules, and had extremely high moral standards, fell powerlessly in front of the Ghost Rider just like that. At this moment, his armor was extremely heavy. The moment he fell to the ground, Captain Dwayne recalled the oath he had made when he joined the Falcon Knights. "I swear on my sword that I will defend all justice and freedom with my life. Anyone who dares to make an enemy of the Falcons will eventually become a ghost under the Falcon's sword. We're brothers, we're family, we're Falcon Knights." For his subordinates, Captain Dwayne had done his best. He had fulfilled his duty as a parent, and before he died, he even felt unprecedentedly relaxed. The future is up to you. Dwayne could finally rest in peace. At this moment, we're also fighting another Ghost Rider. The few of us are only working together to hold back one Ghost Rider. Catherine, who was rushing over from afar to help Dwayne, saw this scene with her own eyes. She watched helplessly as the captain collapsed in front of her. No. Her red hair fluttered in the wind. Catherine rushed over like a madwoman, but the Ghost Rider had already mounted his horse and charged at Gerard. At this moment, at least 8 Ghost Riders had already surrounded Gerard. Gerard didn't ride a horse and held his sword with both hands. A layer of light gradually condensed on his two-handed sword. This was the magic of the Sword of Light. His body also emitted light. This was the blessing of light, which could increase his speed, strength, and so on. His face was full of determination, as if it wasn't something he should have at his age. The Falcon Knight insignia on his chest was dazzling. All the Ghost Riders charged at Gerard at the same time. Chapter 92. Gregory Gerard first poured the remaining holy water in the bottle he was carrying onto his two-handed sword. Then, like Dwayne, he used light barrier to block the Ghost Riders in front of him. Then, a ray of holy light shot down from the sky towards a ghost rider behind him. This was the holy light technique of the light system. That ghost rider didn't have time to dodge and was hit by the holy light technique. Gerard was very strong, and the holy light technique was also very powerful. It directly dispersed the ghost rider, who instantly turned into black smoke. The other ghost riders charged at Gerard, brandishing their swords and slashing at him. Gerard immediately activated the radiant shield and blocked a few of the ghost riders. Then, Gerard leaped and raised his sword. It was very neat, and another ghost rider turned into black smoke. But the ghost riders blocked by light barrier had already broken through the blockade, and Gerard was surrounded again. Taking advantage of the time difference, Gerard got rid of one of the ghost riders, but there were too many of them. At this time, the rest of the people on the battlefield had already started to retreat, because they knew that if it weren't for the help of this knight, they would have already become new undead. They retreated while fighting against the Death Clan and Black Crows who hadn't escaped yet. They also wanted to do their part. Several of us from Demon Hunter's Blade finally worked together to disperse a ghost rider. We hurriedly ran over to help Gerard. Catherine stayed by Commander Dwayne's side. She was heartbroken. Gerard didn't seem to need our help, but in order to reduce his burden, we stalled one of the ghost riders. But the situation didn't seem as optimistic as we thought. Gerard was in the next round of attacks from the ghost riders. He successfully dispersed another ghost rider, but his abdomen was also cut by the ghost rider's greatsword. Blood flowed out. We were also worried for Gerard, but we also had to face the attacks of the ghost riders. We didn't dare to be careless. Gerard used his sword to support his body. He started to lose his strength and knelt on one knee. But the ghost riders didn't give him a chance to rest. They didn't get tired and quickly attacked Gerard again. Finally, we managed to disperse another ghost rider through teamwork. This time, we successfully attracted the attention of 2 ghost riders. But for us, this might be our limit. Gerard was facing the remaining 4 ghost riders, but he was no longer in the same state as before. He still used his ultimate move. He knew that if he didn't use it now, he might not have the chance to use it again. He used the last of his magic power to cast an advanced light magic, Holy Light Protection. Gerard's body was covered with a huge light shield, which was as dazzling as the sun. I didn't know what the Green Dragon Tavern looked like now, but Avina was very different from before. The world was wonderful. She was now an official member of the Demon Hunter's Blade, no longer a waitress. It was a pity that Avina was still unconscious. I would definitely take good care of her. We arrived at the gate of Kellendil. The gate was guarded by the guards of Lord Alonso Williams' family and the Empire's army. At the gate, Prince Kaiser, the current Emperor Kaiser Aldrich's dark red flag with a black lion on a dark red background. There was also the red and white flag of the Lord of Kellendil and the Marshal of the Empire, Duke Alonso William. Seeing the flag of the Hill family and the flag of the Falcon Knights, the guards slightly increased the number and reported to their superiors. After receiving permission from their superiors, the guards allowed us to enter the city. Chapter 93. We arrived at the city, and before we could find a place to set up camp, a group of priests found us. Randall and his soldiers were arranged to rest in the William family's barracks. It was getting late, and we knew that the undead army would arrive soon. Alonso immediately gathered the generals in Kellendil City and Randall's troops. They were deployed to the Golden Lion Fort, the highest command center of the Empire. We followed the group of priests to St. Antonio's Cathedral in Sealandir, where His Holiness the Pope would personally receive us. The St. Antonio Cathedral was a majestic and solemn building. It was the headquarters of the church, where the 7 gods and the Pope lived. Except for Mayfair, who took Avina to her place to treat her injuries, the rest of us followed the healed Gerard and the priests to the St. Antonio Cathedral. The St. Antonio Cathedral was located in the east of Kellendil. It occupied a large area, like a fortress. As soon as we entered the cathedral, we were enveloped by an indescribable solemnity. Loud noises were not allowed here, and we could only hear the soft sounds of hymns. The interior of the cathedral was also very spacious. The dome inside was painted with the story of the 7 gods. In the center, there were statues of the 7 gods. The 7 gods were Raus, the god of love, Hunter, the god of hunting, Raquel, the god of luck, Erinak, the god of war, Pamela, the god of truth, Wisdom, the god of wisdom, and Scene, the god of Sunday. Under the guidance of the priests, we arrived at the Pope's office. I saw the Pope, who was wearing a plain white robe and walking barefoot. If you didn't tell me that he was the Pope, I would have thought that he was a beggar from the slums. The Pope had a head full of white hair and a kind face. He gave off the feeling of a wise sage. When the Pope saw us, he asked the priests to leave. He wanted to speak with us alone. Your Holiness, they are the members of the Demon Hunter mercenary group. This is Laric Ferde, Gerard introduced. All right, Gerard. You have worked hard. Go and rest, the Pope said to Gerard. I felt that the Pope had an imposing manner, and even Gerard seemed to be afraid of him. Nice to meet you. You don't have to call me Pope. Just call me Echo, the Pope said to us after Gerald left. Hello, Lord Echo, I said. Haha, you don't have to be too restrained in front of me, just relax. I have many things to tell you today, the Pope said. Actually, what I wanted to ask the most right now was why the Pope was paying so much attention to me. Laric, you must be curious as to why I'm paying so much attention to you. Actually, it all starts from your birth. You are a dragon descendant, the incarnation of Yang Long, so you are destined to be extraordinary. However, you have yet to awaken your power. However, there are some missions that only you can complete, the Pope told me. The Pope's words confused me. I didn't understand what he was trying to say, nor did I know where he had gathered all this information. The mission this time is for you to assist in investigating the changes in the Beastman's land, right? Actually, the evil orcs you saw before, as well as the demonic energy, and Zulfarl who was controlled by the demonic energy, were all part of a huge conspiracy. All of this was planned by the undead Witch King Lancelot, including his growing nightmare army. All of this is to eradicate all of us who are still alive, the Pope said in one breath. I seemed to understand a little. The strange changes in the undead were all caused by the undead Witch King. I didn't know what this had to do with the Black Dragon's attack on the King's city, but I felt that it wasn't that simple. Actually, the reason why you are so special, Laric. The most important thing is that the undead Witch King seems to have recovered his power. He has also completed the formation of the undead's nightmare army. You also know that these undead can't be killed by ordinary swords. Although the holy water is effective, it is obviously impossible to give it to everyone. Therefore, it is almost impossible to defeat the undead Witch King and his army, unless... The Pope paused and looked at me. Have you heard of the Church's Antonio Canon? The Pope asked. That is the sacred book left behind by the founder of the Church, Antonio. It is the highest law of the Church, Flance said casually. Not bad, this young man knows a lot. It was obvious that the Pope didn't recognize Flance. After a few years of polishing, it was difficult for Flance to tell that he was once a knight of the Church. In the Antonio Canon, I found a strange scroll. It wasn't left behind by San Antonio, but by the undead Witch King Lancelot. What's even stranger is that it is a scroll of time and space. In fact, it is a door of time and space. However, the key to open it is written in the Draconic language, and it is personally opened by Laric Ferde. I don't know how the undead Witch King did it. I spent a lot of effort to gather information before I found you, Laric Ferde, the Pope continued. Seeing the shock on our faces, the Pope revealed something else. Actually, there is another sentence in the scroll. It is the truth of the matter and the way to defeat me. So, for the sake of mankind, Mr. Laric, are you willing to open this door of time and space? What if it is a trap? I asked. After all these years of training, I was a little cautious. But things have already come to this. This is our only hope. The Pope looked at me with a sincere gaze, as if I was the savior of the world. All right, I am willing to give it a try. When do we start? I could only agree. Now, I could only take one step at a time. Haha, that's great. I thank you on behalf of all mankind. There is no time to lose. Let's go now. Popeki happily held my hand. His hand was old, strong, and very warm. Just like that, we arrived at the place where the Antonio cannon was kept. The room was very big. There was a picture of a sun on the smooth brown marble. A group of priests and a few holy knights guarded this place day and night. The holy knights were the Pope's personal knights. To be honest, the Antonio cannon was completely different from what I had imagined. This book was huge and had no paper. It was a book that emitted a holy light, as if it could contain the entire world. The Antonio cannon was read by 12 cardinals who would cast magic to assist the Pope. The Pope, dressed in white, held the immortal scepter handed to him by a priest and prepared to cast a spell. Chapter 94. The Scepter of Immortality was made of an unknown material. The Pope used it to cast magic in front of all of us, and the light from the Antonio scripture became even more dazzling. A chapter made of light flew out of the book. There was a door and a paragraph of draconic text on it. I could actually understand it. The meaning of the text was roughly the same as what the Pope had said. At the Pope's signal, I placed my hand on the door of light. Then, countless strands of light wrapped around my hand and pulled me into the light gate. "You're finally here, Belgrave Flammarion," an unfamiliar man's voice suddenly sounded in my head. In just a moment, the white light in front of me gradually disappeared. What came next was a sky full of snowflakes. Third Era, year 1012, the 5th of October, month of frost. "Lord Lancelot, it's all thanks to you that we were able to progress so smoothly today," a middle-aged man wearing a crown and dark gold plate armor said to me. It turned out that I had become one with Lancelot. I was experiencing everything from his point of view. I didn't speak to the middle-aged man wearing a crown. I just rode beside him in silence. In front and behind us were tens of thousands of well-equipped Derman soldiers. That's especially true of the cavalry around us. They're none other than the famed Holy Emperor Barossa's personal guard. The middle-aged man wearing a crown and dark gold plate armor next to me was His Majesty Barossa. At this moment, I was Lord Lancelot, the Holy Emperor's chief magic consultant and the Empire's #1 mage. On the snow-covered Tamil Plateau, the most majestic landscape in the world, I felt a surge of emotion. The wind was biting cold, and snowflakes danced in the air. Under the protection of the gods, our army had finally advanced and was ready to attack the Dwarven Kingdom's capital, Anrila. The entire Hadrodor continent stretched from the Beastman Kingdom to the west, the Desert Haruz Kingdom to the east, to the German Empire itself. From the Kingdom of Northland to the Grasslands Kurut Kingdom to the south, to the Elven Kingdom. Such a large territory was either subordinate to the German Empire, subservient to it, or annexed by the German Empire as a province. It could be said that the Holy German Empire's territory, with the exception of the Dwarven Kingdom in the far north, belonged to Holy Emperor Barossa. Now, the Empire was finally pointing its sword at the north. His Majesty Barossa had personally led tens of thousands of imperial elites to conquer the Dwarven Kingdom and unify the entire Hadaleda continent. Wherever the army went, they were met with stubborn resistance, but they were invincible. Banners covered the sky, and dwarven corpses littered the road. Finally, they arrived at the capital of the dwarfs, the fortress that was as solid as a rock, Anrela. This was a city that stood on top of a snowy mountain. It was majestic, easy to defend, and difficult to attack. The dwarfs were a race of skilled craftsmen, and their castles were extremely sturdy. The cold wind from the Tamil Plateau caused the snow on the ground to dance in the air. The scenery of the extreme north stretched as far as the eye could see and was incomparably magnificent. When the soldiers arrived, I couldn't help but be amazed by the dwarven city. The snow-white city walls and the snowy mountains of the extreme north merged into one. The mechanical weapons on the city walls were already ready and waiting for orders. It seems that the dwarfs are ready to fight to the death, and we are about to attack the city with all our strength. The large siege weapons were already set up, and the siege chariots and ladders were approaching Anrella's city walls. But at this moment, a loud horn sounded from the city walls of Anrella, where the white flag of the flying fire dragon fluttered. The dwarven city gate slowly descended, and a dozen or so ancient giants rushed out from the incomparably huge city gate. Following them were a dozen mammoths and more than 1,000 dwarven knights. These dwarven knights were either riding wild boars or adopted animals. At this moment, the imperial soldiers were loading the catapults with burning stone under Holy Emperor Barossa's orders. After the live ammunition was loaded, the commander gave the order to fire. In an instant, fireballs whistled across the vast sky, crashing into Anrella's city gates, city walls, and the dwarven army. The flames of war were already burning, and the final battle between the humans and the dwarfs had finally erupted. I, Lancelot, looked at Holy Emperor Barossa. He looked back at me, and gave me a smile and a nod of appreciation. Lancelot, from today onwards, this continent will only have one ruler and his virtuous subjects. And I will be that ruler, and you will be that one and only virtuous subject. Follow me, and let us kill to our heart's content. After saying this to me, the Holy Emperor spurred his horse to the front of the army. Soldiers, in today's battle, there will be no more enemies. We will step over the corpses of our enemies, and welcome our glory. The Holy Emperor shouted to the tens of thousands of elite imperial soldiers. The horn for the humans to charge slowly sounded, and thousands of Derman's personal cavalry, fully clad in black plate armor and riding on tall war horses, followed the Holy Emperor as he charged towards the dwarven army. Through Lancelot's eyes, I saw all of this with my own eyes. My heart was filled with excitement. I never thought that I would be able to personally experience such a large-scale war in this lifetime. Although I couldn't control all of this, I could only follow Lancelot's every move and experience this war from hundreds of years ago. Then, Lancelot rode his horse and caught up to the Holy Emperor. As the Holy Emperor's magic advisor, not only did I have to protect him, I also had to play a huge role in the war. Seeing the ancient giants with my own eyes, I was still a little intimidated. However, the royal cavalry, who were armed to the teeth, charged fearlessly towards them, accompanied by huge fireballs flying towards them from behind. In comparison, the number of dwarfs was indeed insufficient, even though we had long heard of the dwarfs' battle prowess. The gigantic mammoths, together with the skills of the dwarven craftsmen, created a powerful war machine. The mammoths were equipped with many metal armors, and a tower was built on the back of the mammoths. This way, the dwarven spear throwers could attack the enemies below from above. At the same time, they could also control the direction of the mammoths to prevent them from accidentally injuring their allies. At this moment, I dismounted from my horse and stood in the center of the army. I began to cast my magic. The Holy Emperor and a group of royal cavalry stood guard around me. They knew that I needed some time. At this moment, the armies of both sides had already clashed fiercely. In that instant, the earth trembled, and everyone's heart trembled. The gigantic mammoths trampled many of the royal cavalry to death, and the dwarven spear throwers also pierced through some of them with their spears. Distorted armor, crushed bones, and splashed body fluids. It was hard to imagine that a few seconds ago, this was still a mighty royal cavalry. As for me, I had finally finished preparing my magic. Now, it was time to watch my performance. Chapter 95. Lancelot was finally able to cast the forbidden fire magic as he finished chanting the last part of the incantation. Meteor shower, burn, earth. The clear sky suddenly darkened, and many cracks appeared in the sky. A rain of fire fell from the crack and fell to the rear of the dwarf army in an instant. Along with the violent tremors, the snow mountain above Anrela experienced a serious avalanche due to the terrifying power of the magic. This was undoubtedly a huge blow to the dwarfs, and the situation on the battlefield immediately reversed. Other than the giants and mammoths who were already fighting with the Empire's royal knights and some of the dwarf antelope knights, the remaining troops at the rear and the dwarf army on the city gate were all attacked by the meteor shower. Many dwarfs were burned to ashes just like that. It was extremely painful and their deaths were extremely tragic. Even the heavy armor on their bodies was melted and deformed by the scorching flames. Just like that, the dwarfs' indestructible huge city gate was broken through just like that. At the front of the battlefield, the dwarf army exiting the city saw the city behind them being destroyed by the avalanche and meteor shower. In that instant, the anger and resentment in their hearts reached an extreme. They only wanted to destroy the enemy in front of them and take revenge for the dwarfs in the city. For a moment, the dwarf antelope knights wearing huge armor and armed with huge spears were fighting with the royal knights. The elite royal knights couldn't gain any advantage. Often, both sides would stab each other with their spears at the same time. At the same time, although the ancient giants' movements were slower, when they saw how much damage the meteor shower caused to Anrila, they all rushed to my side in anger. Ever since the ancient giants and the dwarfs formed an alliance, the giants had always treated this place as their home. Now that their home was destroyed, it was all because of a puny human like me. They couldn't wait to smash me into pieces with a hammer. It could be said that the pressure on the front of the battlefield was still very high because the strength of the mammoths was too terrifying. Facing such a powerful opponent, the Empire's elites could only use their numbers and bodies to make up for it. Although the Saint Emperor said that this was the last battle, was this really the last battle or just the last stop? There were constantly well-equipped royal knights sacrificing themselves, but they still couldn't stop the dwarf army from charging forward. Even though there were only a few hundred antelope knights left, their combat prowess and defensive prowess were admirable. They were able to fight 1 against 100, causing the Empire's soldiers to suffer quite a bit. As for the giants and mammoths, other than a few of them dying, most of them were still charging over as if there was no one around. One of the primordial giants rushed to Lancelot's side. His eyes were bloodshot, and he only wanted to kill this despicable human. The club in his hand was already stained with too much minced meat and blood. These were all from the royal knights. At that moment, the ancient giant's eyes were filled with rage. He swung the club in his hand, wanting to give this despicable and insignificant human magician a heavy blow. I had completed my mission. Even though I couldn't control Lancelot's actions, I could only use Lancelot's eyes to witness everything with my own eyes. I watched as the gigantic club came crashing down on me. I could even see the sticky blood stains on it, as well as pieces of flesh and armor. Right at that moment, a golden sword light slashed towards the heavy wooden club from behind me. It was His Majesty Holy Emperor Barossa. He had blocked the ancient giant's fatal blow for me. Lancelot, who had been prepared to die, was saved by His Majesty who had acted in time. Right now, he was wearing a crown and dark golden plate armor. The battle sword in his hand was the famous Song of the Conqueror. It was a sharp one-handed sword with a gilded handle. Just like its name, it was a song of the conqueror that resounded over the enemy's bones. "Follow me. We'll charge in together and plant our flag on the dwarven walls," the Holy Emperor said to me. The ancient giant was blocked by the Holy Emperor's golden sword light. The sword light was so powerful that the ancient giant couldn't help but take a few steps back. The ancient giant's palm also hurt from the impact. This was the ancient giant's first time facing such a powerful human. He had already entered a berserk state. He only wanted to immediately destroy the two humans in front of him. However, the Holy Emperor didn't give him the chance. He leaped up as fast as lightning, and with a single move, a deep cut appeared on the ancient giant's neck. Before the ancient giant could react, his body had already collapsed to the ground. This was the difference in strength. At that moment, the Holy Emperor was so lofty in my eyes. Just like that, in the face of absolute numbers, the Holy Emperor, and Lancelot's strength. The dwarven army that had come out of the city to fight all died without exception. Not a single one surrendered. What a terrifying enemy. All that was left were charred corpses and exceptionally tragic sacrifices. The ground was littered with corpses. Some of them belonged to the enemy, but most of them belonged to us. Looking at the corpses, the pure white snow was now dyed red with blood. The charred corpses of the Imperial soldiers had their armor deformed. The Imperial soldier who had been impaled by a spear was still holding his sword not too far away. After experiencing such a powerful and terrifying resistance, I was deeply shaken. Was this really a battle of justice? Perhaps there was no such thing as justice in war. I followed in the footsteps of Holy Emperor Barossa, and behind me were countless imperial soldiers. We charged toward the Dwarven Kingdom's capital, Anira, which had already been submerged by the avalanche. There shouldn't be any more resistance. We were filled with confidence. After all, after such a tragic battle, the Dwarven army that had come out of the city had been completely wiped out, and the ones guarding the city had also been buried by the avalanche. But at the same time, we were also faced with the problem of how to advance into the city. It seemed that we could only excavate bit by hand. The Holy Emperor sent a vanguard to excavate and clear a path into the city. But the difficulty exceeded our expectations. First of all, the progress was very slow. Second, white bears were constantly charging out of the Dwarven city, causing great casualties to the Imperial soldiers. It seemed that the dwarfs hadn't died out yet. They were also a race that was famous for their love of building underground cities. So it was very likely that although the city on the surface had been destroyed by the avalanche, the underground was still intact. It was very likely that the treacherous dwarfs had already hidden underground, because we didn't find many dwarven corpses during the excavation. There were even dwarfs that had been dug up. At first, we thought they were corpses, but unexpectedly, they were still alive. Although they were killed by the Imperial soldiers in the end, there were even more casualties. Without exception, not a single one of the dwarfs surrendered. Just like that, we continued forward with great difficulty. Chapter 96. Finally, after a period of digging, we managed to open a path into the Dwarven capital of Anrila. The Empire's heavy infantry led the way, while the Holy Emperor and I were in the middle. Behind us were the most elite Imperial knights. Some of the soldiers at the front were experienced and powerful sergeants. They wore black plate armor and black helmets, wielded long halberds or giant axes, and had the emblem of a lion engraved on their chests. They were armed to the teeth. After passing through the giant Dwarven city gates, we couldn't help but be impressed by the majesty of the buildings. I didn't expect the Dwarven walls to be so tall. At this point, we were already inside the Dwarven city. Although the vanguard was still clearing away the snow so that we could clear a path, it was still difficult for us to advance. Deathly silence. We all had a bad feeling about this, and we all prepared to fight at any moment. We didn't believe that the Dwarven capital only had this many people. They must be hiding somewhere underground, because dwarfs were a race that loved mining and metallurgy to make money. Of course, dwarfs were also a stubborn and powerful race. After a difficult advance, we finally reached a fortress high up in the city. This was probably the center of power and palace of the Dwarven Kingdom. This place wasn't completely submerged by the avalanche like the lower city. Many of the buildings here had been destroyed by the avalanche, but because the snow had flowed down, this place was almost completely exposed. Finally, without the influence of the snow, we felt much lighter. Seeing that we were about to enter the main hall of the fortress, Holy Emperor Barossa sent a few Imperial soldiers as scouts to scout the place. After a while, the scout came back and reported that it was very magnificent inside. There were many bronze statues standing inside. The hall was richly decorated and there were metal products everywhere. Even the throne was made of gold. However, there was no one inside. For safety's sake, the Holy Emperor ordered the Imperial soldiers to stand guard outside and search. Only I and a few Imperial knights were brought into the main hall of the fortress. His Majesty and I entered the main hall of the Dwarven fortress. Just like the scouts, we had seen many beautiful works of our enemies after so many years of war, but we were still amazed by the craftsmanship of the Dwarven craftsmen. It would be great if we could capture a few master Dwarven craftsmen alive, Holy Emperor Barossa said with a smile. Those tall and mighty bronze statues, as well as the utensils and decorations, all of them showed us the wealth and craftsmanship of the dwarfs. The Sage Emperor walked up to the Dwarf King's golden throne, and the Imperial Royal Knights lined up in 2 rows. None of them were riding horses, and they looked like heavy infantry. The Sage Emperor sat down, but before he could say anything, the bronze statues began to steam. The sage emperor had carefully inspected the throne before sitting down, and there was no idiot who would smear poison on his own throne. But unexpectedly, the throne seemed to be connected to some kind of switch. The moment the sage emperor sat down, the bronze men immediately came to life. Before anyone could react, a bunch of dwarfs suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The sage emperor had been relying on his own strength. Who would have thought that his sudden appearance would be so difficult to deal with? He immediately retreated to my side. The royal knights immediately formed a circle to protect us. The door was open, and the soldiers at the door kept rushing in. But what we didn't expect was that many metal vehicles that we had never seen before would appear out of nowhere. These vehicles were equipped with spinning weapons that could continuously fire a special kind of arrow at our soldiers. In a short period of time, countless people were killed or injured. The sergeants fought bravely and charged at the front, but many of them were instantly killed by these weapons that they had never seen before. The others raised their shields to protect the sage emperor, but they were beaten so badly that they couldn't even raise their heads. At this moment, the dwarf king Cedric Wildhammer rode out from the back of the hall on his antelope. He had a thick red beard and a golden crown embedded with many gems. He held an extremely heavy hammer in his hand. At this moment, the imperial soldiers outside were suppressed by the metal carriages and couldn't enter. The few who did enter were all killed by the dwarven warriors and bronze men lying in ambush in the hall. Hurry up and use magic to support me. We will kill this dwarf here. Although the sage emperor was very confident in his own strength, he knew that it was best to be careful in the current situation. The dwarf king raised his hammer and pointed at the sage emperor, indicating that he wanted to fight the sage emperor alone. Of course, the sage emperor wouldn't be afraid of a mere dwarf. After all, his strength was one of the best in this continent. Right now, it was more advantageous for us to kill the dwarf king directly. The sage emperor signaled the royal knights to not take action. He alone was enough to defeat this dwarf riding on the antelope. The sage emperor pulled out the Song of the Conqueror from his waist. He wanted to see if this extremely sharp sword could pierce through the dwarf's armor. The royal knights stepped aside and let the sage emperor and the dwarf king duel. The dwarf king rode on the antelope and charged at the sage emperor, smashing his hammer heavily at the sage emperor's chest. The sage emperor blocked with his sword. With a clang, the sage emperor activated a golden battle aura. This was a battle aura that only a true expert could use. He almost didn't block it. The sage emperor felt that the dwarf king's hammer was terrifyingly powerful and couldn't be underestimated. After being blocked by the sage emperor, the dwarf king slashed back, forcing the antelope to fight the sage emperor face to face. There were no shouts. The royal knights stood around as if they were watching a show. There was no time to think. The two sides exchanged blows in an extremely intense battle. Loud collisions rang out in the hall. The sage emperor felt that it wasn't a good idea to drag things out like this. He had to end the battle quickly. He purposely showed an opening, and the dwarf king took the opportunity to smash the sage emperor's left arm. However, the sage emperor had already gathered all his killing intent in his right hand. As expected, the dwarf king fell for it. His hammer smashed into the sage emperor's left arm, but the sage emperor directly pierced the dwarf king's abdomen from behind. Men, kill these dwarfs. Lancelot, quickly heal me. The sage emperor's left arm was broken and in urgent need of treatment. His forehead was already covered in cold sweat. This was a rare moment in recent years when he was in such a sorry state. At this moment, he could no longer use his battle aura to protect himself. Lancelot, haha, I've already done what I promised you. The rest is up to you, the dwarf king suddenly said in the common language, blood dripping from his mouth. What? Before he could even react, the sage Emperor Barossa had already been stabbed in the heart from behind with my special dagger. No. I screamed in my mind. I tried my best to control Lancelot's body so that it wouldn't kill the sage emperor, but this body was completely out of my control. Chapter 97. Why did you stab the sage emperor? My heart was filled with hatred and confusion. I would never forget the way the sage emperor looked at me. "Save me," the sage emperor said to the imperial knights. However, no one moved half a step. Everyone looked at the sage emperor's helpless and pained expression. Just like that, Lancelot killed the sage emperor. Before his death, the sage emperor's anger at the betrayal caused him to cast the most vicious curse. "Lancelot, you, and all the imperial knights, you traitors, your souls will never be reincarnated. Unless the raging flames of the dragon devour you and the light of forgiveness purifies you, even if your physical bodies are destroyed, your souls will never be at peace." With that, the sage emperor raised his head and laughed, his laughter echoing in the empty hall. Before his death, the sage emperor felt incomparable sorrow, even colder than the extreme cold of the northern frontier. He thought about how he had lived a life of endless glory, loved his people like his own children, and fought in all directions. But now, he was assassinated from behind by the person he trusted the most. If it wasn't for the fact that he was strong enough, he might have died in that instant. At this moment, there was no one by his side to help him. He was about to die in a foreign land. Before his death, he felt so lonely and empty. The flowers, glory, and wealth of the past were all fading away with him, so death was such a sorrowful and painful thing. Although he was unwilling, there was nothing he could do. At this moment, Lancelot stabbed the sage emperor's heart again, and then a second, a third. Only when the sage emperor could not be any more dead did he throw away the dagger. At this moment, I was in Lancelot's body, witnessing everything. For some reason, I felt indescribably sorrowful. Perhaps I was attracted by the sage emperor's smile, his confidence, his sense of responsibility, and his sense of security. He was like a warm and reliable big brother next door. Now, he was killed by me right in front of me. I really wanted to kill this Lancelot, but there was nothing I could do. I could only follow Lancelot's memories to witness this piece of history. Haha, do you know how long I have endured for today? From the day I stepped onto this path, I have never regretted it, Lancelot said to the sage emperor's corpse. Lancelot came over and spoke to Cedric Wildhammer in Dwarvish, "Dwarven King, this is all thanks to you. I'll leave the rest to your men." At the same time, the royal knights who had betrayed the Holy Emperor with Lancelot rushed out of the hall with the dwarf army under the lead of their knight captain. A bloody massacre began. The dwarf army's copper puppets, steam chariots, and the extremely powerful dwarf warriors, as well as all the royal knights, all charged towards the remaining Empire soldiers. Without a leader, the soldiers had no strength to resist and surrendered one after another. Just like that, Lancelot became the new leader of the Empire's soldiers, and I started to become unstable. My spiritual power started to leave this world, and my vision started to blur. I witnessed this unprecedented expedition with my own eyes, and I also witnessed his end with my own eyes. Just as it was about to end, a voice that I hadn't heard in a long time sounded in my head. It was the voice of the Belgrave Flammarion. He had actually appeared again. "Let us kill that madman Lancelot together. You shall obtain my power. This is your new mission," Yang Long's soul said to me from the depths of my soul. With a dragon's roar, I gradually separated from Lancelot's physical body. I would completely leave this memory and this spatial world. Before I left, I seemed to see Lancelot smiling at me, as though he was still hiding something from me. I completely returned to reality from this world. I was still in San Antonio Cathedral, and only a few moments had passed. I told the Pope and the others everything that I had seen, and deduced that these undead were probably afraid of the power of dragon flames and holy light. However, I didn't tell them about the Belgrave Flammarion. Pope Exi agreed with my opinion. He also attached great importance to this matter, and immediately sent someone to contact Marshal Alonso. It seemed that a great war was unavoidable. The whole of Kelendil would be facing an unprecedented war against the undead. Alonso also took this matter seriously. He immediately held a pre-war deployment meeting in the Golden Lion Fort's command center. This time, even Kaiser the Great came. Kaiser the Great was really pitiful. His life was full of ups and downs, and he was caught up in the turmoil of the country at such a young age. During the pre-war meeting, Alonso's brother, Count Joe William, Lord Randall Hill, Chief Magic Advisor Morse, and a group of imperial ministers also participated in the meeting. During this meeting, Alonso stood beside Kaiser the Great and deployed the defense of Kelendil city. He also ordered everyone to prepare immediately. There wasn't much time left. The Pope also sent out all his forces to prepare for the upcoming war against the undead. In an instant, the whole of Kelendil was mobilized. This war that concerned the survival of the Empire, the war between humans and the undead, would take place in this city with such a long history. Everyone rubbed their fists. This time, after learning about the undead's weakness, everyone gained some confidence because of this information. I didn't know why Lancelot wanted me to see this. It wouldn't do him any good, and it would only make me hate him. Even Yang Long wanted to kill him with me. I didn't even know why he wanted to tell us about the undead's weakness. However, even if we knew about this weakness, it wouldn't be of much use. It would only be better than being helpless and waiting for death. However, I knew very well that this battle didn't belong to me. I had my own mission to complete. I wanted to find Lancelot and confront him face to face. We demon hunters Blade temporarily settled down in the former Green Dragon Tavern. This was the place where Avina and I met. Ever since the Black Dragon's attack, this place had been renovated and refurbished. The owner of this place had changed. Even the name of this place was no longer Green Dragon Tavern, but Squirrel Tavern. It was truly a change of heart. On the eve of the battle, I told Avina my thoughts. We faced each other and held each other's hands, looking at each other. Avina also wanted to go with me. I had no choice but to agree. She told me that she had a little secret to tell me on the way there. We planned to leave early the next morning. Under the bright moonlight, we gave each other a deep kiss and hug. That was enough. The east was bright, and we left the room. We planned to leave for the undead witch King Lancelot's lair. At this moment, other people appeared beside us. Chapter 98. Kelvin overheard your conversation yesterday. Don't even think about leaving us behind. We are comrades, Natalia said first. Well, in that case, Mayfair, you and Kelvin. You two stay here, I said to the rest of the men. Everyone agreed to my suggestion. Although Kelvin was a little reluctant, he still agreed to stay and protect Mayfair. Just like that, the five of us, namely Natalia, Flance, Lofis, Avina and I, set off before the sky was completely bright. Because I had received the guidance and power of the Belgrave Flammarion, I could transform into a dragon. So I brought Flance and Natalia summoned the whirlwind bird like the last time. She also used the gigantification spell to expand it to the size where she and Lofis could be brought along. Avina also told me her little secret. The magical beast egg that we found on Ivory Island was contracted to a fairy dragon. It was no wonder that the little guy could escape from the magical space by himself. Not only did fairy dragons know many magic spells, they were also naturally immune to many magic spells. I really didn't expect that we would become so powerful. We split into 3 groups, Flance and I, Natalia and Lofis and Avina and her fairy dragon. Just like that, 2 dragons and a huge whirlwind bird took advantage of the darkness before dawn. In addition, we deliberately hid our tracks and left Kelendil quietly, flying directly to the Death Mountain range. On the other side of Kelendil, many people weren't actually sleeping. Everyone was preparing for the war that would come at any time. On the city walls, piles of arrows were transported up, along with large amounts of hot oil and huge rocks. Outside the city walls, there were many spikes placed around the moat. There were also many fire points set up, the flames illuminating the night. The soldiers and civilians were busy preparing. Many male civilians were conscripted into the militia. They were given weapons and were given the necessary organization and training. The women were sent to the huge secret room under the new hero palace together with the members of the royal family to hide. There were also some wealthy merchants who wanted to mix in, but they were discovered by Alonso's men and were immediately killed and hung up. However, there were also some girls who didn't want to take refuge. They wanted to be given weapons to fight like the men, but they were forced into a huge secret room by the soldiers. The prisoners, slaves, and some of the poor who were locked up in the prison were released and organized into a miserable team. They were given the worst weapons and equipment. It was no exaggeration to say that they were the first wave to die. The members of the church were also mobilized. The Falcon Knights, Crimson Flame Knights, and Twilight Knights, the three major knight orders of the church, were all present. There were also many experts hidden in the dark. This was because only the Pope knew that only their church was the main force in this war. However, only he knew some things about Lancelot and their church. It was not an exaggeration to say that this time, to a large extent, their church was targeted. Morse was responsible for the safety of the Hero Palace. He had even mobilized the magic cannons. Like airships, they were one of the most advanced technologies in the sacred realm. For the time being, no one had noticed that we had left. Everyone was busy with their own tasks. Some were training, some were sharpening their swords, and some were patrolling. They were all busy. The three of us were flying in the sky. Suddenly, we entered a sky covered by dark clouds. We saw a green army below us. It was the undead. There were so many of them. This was the largest number of undead we had seen since the beginning of this mission. It seemed that the enemy had turned out in full force. The more of them there were, the emptier their base would be, which would be more effective against us. I asked Davina and Natalia to speed up. I took Flance with me to teach the undead a lesson. I wanted to test the power given to me by the Belgrave Flammarion. I wanted to test the power of the dragon language magic. I asked Flance to hurry up. I swooped down and flew over the undead. I spat out a mouthful of dragon flame, which instantly dispersed countless undead. However, the undead immediately counterattacked. I took advantage of my speed and dodged. I was afraid that Flance wouldn't be able to hold on, so I had to fly to the Mountain of Death. Our goal this time was to deal with the undead Witch King directly, not to tangle with the undead. Although we had an advantage in the air, the undead weren't easy to deal with. If we kept fighting, Flance and I wouldn't have a good ending. We could only leave the undead to the church in Kellendil. We had a more important mission. Randall Hill was the lord of Kellendil City. He and his army had fought against the undead before. He knew what he was about to face. Alonso assigned him a group of newly recruited militia. He and his men were sent to guard the western part of Kellendil. It was likely that the undead's main force would attack this place. Although there were many Imperial soldiers here, Randall knew what would happen to them. Fortunately, the Falcon Knights and the Flaming Knights were also stationed in the western part of the city. The next evening, the same evening we left. Today, the guards on the city walls were some militia and veterans of the Hill family who had fought against the undead. These veterans not only fought against the undead, but more importantly, they survived. The veterans described the undead's appearance to the recruits. Although it was a little exaggerated, it was still an accurate description of the undead. One of the recruits, who was only 12 years old, was trembling in fear. Seeing this, a veteran patted the recruit's head and comforted him that it would be fine and that he would survive. At this moment, a horn sounded on the western part of the city walls. Soon, a bell rang. Many torches were lit on the city walls. The southern part of the city also sounded the alarm bell. The undead had come. They had really come. Gradually, night fell. The war was about to begin. The large group of green undead was extremely terrifying, causing people to tremble in fear. This was the nightmare army of the undead, the main force of the undead. With the evil spirits and ghost spirits at the front, countless black crows circled in the air. Following them were the goat-headed undead. They held large scythes and had black skin. It was a terrifying sight. Even more terrifying were the ghost riders and necromancers. The sound of war drums. This was the sound of Alonso's army. The sound of the drums gave everyone a boost of confidence. Everyone knew that the marshal would also be fighting with them. Everyone knew that the war would be extremely fierce, but they also knew that they had their own comrades and allies by their side. They believed in each other. In the dark night, the terrifying green undead and the humans who were fighting to the death, no one knew whether the war would be won or lost. Chapter 99. The three of us maintained our speed as we flew past Fredenberg. The place was now in ruins, and many undead were stationed there. Dark clouds covered the sky. Perhaps the undead didn't like sunlight, so the undead Witch King had used magic to change the weather. When we arrived at the Red Moon Lake, we decided to take a break. After all, it was my first time flying, so I wasn't very familiar with it. The fairy dragon, whose body was sparkling and translucent, also returned to the magical space to rest temporarily. The five of us found a big tree and ate some food under it. I thought it would be great if I could eat the fresh and hot food that Kelvin had cooked. We ate some food and rested for a while. Then, we discussed the battle plan against the undead Witch King. We hadn't found any traces of the undead in the Red Moon Lake, but the atmosphere was too gloomy. We decided to head to the undead Witch King's lair as soon as possible. The steam rising from the lake had turned into a thick fog. Suddenly, the surface of the lake rolled as if something was about to come out of the water. We had already planned to leave, so when we saw this scene, we immediately set off. We split into 3 groups and tried our best to escape the Red Moon Lake. That was close. What was that? I asked Yang Long's soul in my body. Little rascal, it could be a water monster from the lake. However, it might have mutated. If you fight it head-on, you won't be its match. I'm really curious what kind of water monster it is. I was curious about the thing in the lake. You'll have a chance to know in the future. Even if you don't know, what can you do? You should know that the guy you're dealing with now is much stronger than that water monster. I haven't appeared for a long time. Did you miss me? The Belgrave Flammarian asked. I do miss you, but you didn't appear. I thought you disappeared. I didn't dare to ask. There were a few times when I wanted to use the dragon soul power to release powerful draconic magic, but I couldn't do it. Actually, I was a little dissatisfied with the disappearance of Yang Long's soul. Haha, little rascal, you are me, and I am you. The reason why you felt me disappear was because the dragon soul power I gave you was sealed. Only when your strength reaches a certain level can your soul fuse with mine. You are too weak now, so I had no choice but to appear and help you. In the future, you will know more things. Take your time, Yang Long said to me meaningfully. As we talked, the 5 of us crossed the majestic Sevis Falls and finally arrived at the root of it all, the Mountains of Death. The Death Mountain Range was a boundless black forest. Almost all of the trees were withered and lifeless. The ground reeked of sulfur, and steam and thick fog rose from the ground. We landed at the border between the forest and the mountain range. We couldn't fly over directly. Yang Long told me that there was a magic barrier here. From now on, we could only sneak into the depths of the Death Mountain Range. I returned to my human form, and Avina recalled the fairy dragon. She was already very powerful to be able to summon the fairy dragon for such a long time. The 5 of us carefully explored the area and prepared to head to the lair of the undead Witch King. We groped our way forward in the thick fog. Suddenly, I saw a little girl not far away. This reminded me of the little girl I saw outside the cave when I rescued Avina. What was going on? When I asked Avina what happened, she said she didn't remember what happened. As for what was in the cave and where the cave was, I didn't know. Lophis was in charge of scouting ahead. He was good at hiding and scouting the surroundings. After searching for a long time, we found that we had returned to the original place. It seemed that we were lost. Getting lost in such a scary place made our scalps tingle. That was because we heard a woman crying, laughing, and some ghostly voices all around us. We were disoriented and couldn't find the way to the undead Witch King's lair. We started to feel thirsty and hungry, and we started to hallucinate. I started to sweat because the air made me uncomfortable. Moreover, I suddenly saw the little girl's figure flash by. It seemed that only I could see it. The others said that they didn't notice it. I asked Yang Long what to do, but Yang Long didn't answer me. He always left me alone to deal with and make decisions. I really hoped that Yang Long could help me at this time. This time, I followed and asked the others to follow me. The little girl's figure appeared and disappeared. I didn't know how long we followed, but the little girl's figure disappeared in front of us. Suddenly, a golden-haired little girl wearing a white dress appeared in front of me. She was holding a doll. I couldn't see her face because she was facing away from us. All of a sudden, she turned around. I didn't have time to see her face before she screamed and disappeared. The thick fog scattered. Not far from us, there were many black crows' nests. Those nests surrounded us. At this moment, some black crows flew out of those disgusting, filthy nests made of rotten meat. Those nests looked like giant meat sacks. There were hundreds of them. After some cawing, countless black crows flew out of the nests and hovered in the sky. "This isn't good. Run," Flance said to us. We quickly ran toward the mountain. Those black crows shot toward us like sharp swords. We were like headless flies as we ran for our lives in a futile attempt to avoid the thousands of black crows' attacks. These black crows were too terrifying. Frant had seen with his own eyes that these things could drill into a person's eyes. After eating them, they would drill out from the back of the head. Fortunately, we saw a cave not far from us. Without thinking, we immediately jumped into it to avoid the attacks of so many black crows. The 5 of us rushed into the cave. Natalia and I brought up the rear. Lofis lit a torch in the cave. Natalia and I used the fire magic, Flame Blast. I tried to use the draconic magic, Yang Long's Dragon Breath. I couldn't use the power of Dragon Breath yet. It was only a little stronger than Natalia's Flame Blast. Just like that, we resisted the first wave of black crows that wanted to eat us. After that, the black crows saw that we weren't weak, and they seemed to be afraid of the cave. They didn't come in and just hovered in the sky. Thus, we took advantage of the narrow cave entrance and successfully resisted the attack of the black crows. Suddenly, Avina said. She remembered that she had been to this cave before. "You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.